Mom is struggling to get by on her pension, and we, who are still able to work, should lend her a hand, shouldn't we? During the discussion about inheritance following their father's passing, Billy, the second son, earnestly addresses his brother and sister-in-law. However, it appears his words didn't quite strike a chord with them. How about we consider that just because she's relying on her pension doesn't mean we're obligated to hand over our hard-earned money? Suggests Billy. Exactly. Is our mother-in-law expecting us to foot her bills? Adds his wife. Suddenly, the eldest son and his wife shoot me looks as though they've tasted something sour, a gaze not befitting of one's parents. Stop trying to sponge off us, it's becoming a nuisance. The pensioner should fend for herself, except for special occasions like weddings and funerals. Stay out of our affairs, they retort. Hey, that's enough, Billy interjects, but I find myself looking down, clenching my fists. Not only are they seemingly impatient for my husband's demise, but they're also griping about inheritance and have labeled me a freeloader. Perhaps I've raised Billy wrong. I can't endure it any longer. Yet I address the eldest son and his wife calmly. I understand your perspective. Let's sever our ties. My name is Catherine, and I'm turning 65 this year. I live with my retired husband, who is kind and supportive. Together, we've raised 2 children. Dan, our eldest son, and Billy, our second. Recently, we've considered renovating our aging home, hoping to live with Dan and his wife, Rebecca, once the renovations are complete. When I broached the topic with Dan over the phone, his reluctance was palpable. Living together? Spare me. Rebecca won't like it either, he retorted. But if we're investing in renovations for our shared benefit, shouldn't it also accommodate their needs? However, from the other end of the line, I could almost hear Rebecca scoff. Living together? That's utterly impossible. I see. Let's just drop this conversation, I said, feeling the weight of the eldest son and his wife's usual superiority complex and cold demeanor. After I hung up, I relayed Dan and the other's sentiments to my husband, exactly as they were. He wore a somewhat lonely expression but spoke up cheerfully. Can't be helped. Let's focus on making the renovations for our comfort in old age. Following that decision, our home was remodeled to our liking, transformed into a barrier-free space. Several months later, scheduled for a meal with both our sons and their wives, Billy and Anne, our second son, arrived first. Anne, always considerate, handed me a hostess gift and immediately offered to help in the kitchen. Mother-in-law, you're always so good at cooking, she praised. Oh, thank you. I'm grateful for your help, Anne, I replied. As we chatted, the eldest son and his wife arrived, plopping heavily onto the sofa and demanding tea. Observing me preparing it, Rebecca and Dan grumbled impatiently. They have no consideration, Rebecca complained. Exactly, we're guests here. Hurry up, Dan added. Just as I was about to serve them, Billy approached Dan quietly from the side. Dan, can't you at least do that much by yourself? He whispered. Shut up, Dan snapped back. At Dan's harsh words, I sighed inwardly. Billy and Anne were kind, yet even they faced Dan's overbearing attitude. However, we had called both siblings together for an important discussion. As dinner commenced, Dan, eating grumpily, broke the silence. Hey Dad, since you called us here, you must have some business. Spit it out. My husband looked at me, and I nodded slightly. The truth is, it has been found that I have lung cancer. Billy and Anne showed genuine surprise, while the expressions of the eldest son and his wife remained unchanged. Dad, cancer? What's the current situation? Starting next week, I'll be hospitalized, I began, the weight of my words heavy in the air. They told me the cancer has spread all over my body, and I've got about 6 months left. That can't be. Well, dreadful news, Dan muttered, almost as if it were someone else's burden. Rebecca chimed in, you can't beat age, right? My uncle quickly passed away from stomach cancer too. Thoughtless words pricked at me, and I couldn't help but raise my voice. Would you two just stop it? I interjected. It's fine, but... My husband's gentle voice calmed me down as he turned his attention to his children. I want you guys to look after your mother after I'm gone. Of course, Dad, we'll take care of Mom, so don't worry, the second son and his wife assured us firmly. Yes, please think about your own health, father-in-law, they added. However, the eldest son and his wife seemed disengaged, absorbed in their cell phones, not seeming to register their father's words at all. As the meal concluded, everyone began to depart. Since the eldest son and his wife left quickly, I stepped outside to see off the second son and his wife. Mom, I know it's tough, but hang in there. We'll also help, of course. Please let us know anything, Billy expressed sincerely. Thank you, Billy, I replied softly, touched by his kindness. With that heartfelt conversation, I bid farewell to the second son and his wife. My husband opted for palliative care over surgery and chemotherapy, so he was admitted to a hospice the following week. I began visiting the hospice almost daily, with my second son and his wife driving me and assisting in my husband's care. However, no matter how much I reached out, the eldest son and his wife never made an appearance. Then, about 5 months later, my husband's condition took a turn for the worse. I called the eldest son and his wife, informing them that this might be the end. Reluctantly, they appeared, but Dan neither held his father's hand, nor uttered a word to him. Instead, they merely stared at my frail husband as though he were a repulsive sight. We've shown our faces, isn't that enough? We have matters to attend to, so we'll be leaving now, the elder couple announced abruptly, exiting the hospital room not even 10 minutes after their arrival. As soon as they left, I noticed Rebecca grabbing her jacket. Hastily, I rushed after them. Approaching the staircase leading to the hallway, I saw them descending slowly, engrossed in their conversation and oblivious to my presence. It really seems like Dad's time is near. Hey, what's going to happen to the inheritance when father-in-law is gone? Dan smiled at Rebecca's question. Dad was just a regular employee, but Mom and the rest have been living quite comfortably lately, haven't they? Maybe they've been investing in the stock market or something. We could probably expect a decent inheritance. Haha, Rebecca chuckled. Oh, I can't wait. I've been longing for an overseas trip. I also want to design my own handbag. All we can do now is wait for things to wrap up, Dan remarked. Listening to their conversation, tears welled up in my eyes. I couldn't possibly bring myself to tell my husband about this. Unable to confront them, I silently returned to the hospital room. 2 weeks later, he passed away. I remained by his side for a long time, but it was Billy and his wife who offered me comfort, their support a solace in the midst of grief. I managed to hold myself together, and the funeral proceeded smoothly. After the service, with only family remaining, Dan, unable to contain his impatience, broached the topic of Dad's inheritance. What the hell, Dan? We just laid Dad to rest today, Billy immediately reprimanded him, but Dan's glare silenced any further objections. You, the second son, just shut up. With a firm gaze, I intervened. We'll arrange a meeting to discuss the inheritance next week. For today, please just go home. At my words, the elder couple grunted and promptly left. The following week, the cheerful elder couple and the serious younger couple arrived at our home for the inheritance meeting. Facing them, I began, firstly, I should mention that your father's inheritance amounts to about $30,000. What? Dan exclaimed, visibly taken aback by the news. I'd like to split this according to legal inheritance shares, with me taking half and each of you getting a quarter, I explained. Wait, hold on. Are you sure there's only $30,000? Dan persisted, sensing something amiss in my tone. I handed him a thick envelope. All the documents are in here. Please review them, I instructed. After inspecting the documents, Dan and Rebecca's faces twisted in frustration. Damn, Dad was really strapped for cash, huh? So we're only getting $7,500 each. That's too little. If it's this low, give us the house too, Dan demanded, clearly dissatisfied. Billy's response was swift and angry. Our mother still lives in that house. We won't give it up. It's because you wasted money on renovations that we're left with so little. If the inheritance is this small, the house stays with us, he declared firmly. Calmly, I addressed the irritated couple. This house was painstakingly renovated by your father so we could live here in our old age. I won't just hand it over. I'll keep it as long as I live. That's not fair. You can't keep everything to yourself, Dan protested, his fury evident. Billy intervened, restraining his brother. Dad was concerned about Mom until the end. You might not understand it, Dan, he said softly, looking at me with concern. We're going to announce our decision about the inheritance. Mom, you should take our side too. Dad would rest easy knowing that, Billy's wife added, nodding beside him. If they won't share, we'll gladly take their part, Dan insisted. That's impossible. Mom's living on her pension. It's tough. We who are working should be supporting her. Billy scolded his older brother and his wife sincerely, but his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Just because she's living on her pension doesn't mean we can give our money away, Dan retorted, unyielding. Exactly. Perhaps mother-in-law was planning to siphon off our money from the beginning, Rebecca added, her tone accusatory. The elder couple looked at me with disdain, their expressions sour and disrespectful. Stop acting like parasites. It's a nuisance. Elderly women living on pensions should keep out of everything except for weddings and funerals. Just stay quiet, Dan lashed out. Hey, that's enough. Billy intervened, but I kept my head down, fists clenched. Not only were they wishing for my husband's death, but they also complained about the inheritance and even labeled me as a parasite. I couldn't help but wonder where I had gone wrong in raising him. Regret flooded my heart, and tears threatened to spill from my eyes. But I couldn't afford to lose my composure in this moment. Gathering my feelings, I addressed Dan and Rebecca calmly. I understand what you're saying. Let's sever our ties. At my words, the elder couple looked momentarily surprised before breaking into smirks. Really? That's the best news I've heard, they remarked sarcastically as Dan and Rebecca hurried to leave. Before storming out, they threw one last barb at Billy and his wife, tauntingly calling them to take care of the parasite. As the door closed behind them, Billy and his wife rushed over to me. Mom, are you okay? They're just too awful. We're always by your side. Please don't be upset, they comforted me. Still looking down, I raised my face and met their eyes. Billy and I have something to tell you, I began. A few months later, while relaxing at home, Dan and Rebecca unexpectedly appeared, accompanied by Billy. What's going on? We've severed our ties, haven't we? Dan demanded, his voice raised. Indeed, come on in. I invited them, ignoring their aggressive tone. As they entered, their faces flushed with anger. Billy spoke up with an apologetic tone. Sorry, Mom. When asked about the house, I couldn't help but invite them in. That's fine for now. Everyone please come in, I said, leading them inside. But as soon as the eldest couple stepped into the living room, they began to raise their voices. What do you mean you're giving the house to Billy? You're disregarding us, they protested. I maintained my composure and explained calmly, Billy has promised to maintain the house and preserve your father's memories. That's why I've decided to leave it to him. Dan stared at me, taken aback. What do you mean? He questioned. Billy and Anne have been a great support to me. It's only natural, I replied warmly, thanking them. We're not here to hear that. You said you'd take over the house yourself, didn't you? The eldest couple retorted. Glancing at the eldest daughter-in-law, who seemed ready to explode, I elaborated. I thought I'd hand it over to someone who would respect your father's and my wishes. Besides, I've started receiving some rental income. Their surprise evident, I continued matter-of-factly. Remember last year when my father, your grandfather, passed away? Billy attended the funeral, but you couldn't because you were out of town. Well, your grandfather was a landlord who owned several buildings and apartments. Finally, the inheritance has been settled, and I've started receiving rental income. The eldest couple's faces displayed shock. We never heard anything about that, they exclaimed. About that rental income, how much are we talking about? Dan inquired. It's about $3 million a year, so it's easy for me to give one of the houses to my adorable son and his wife, I revealed. At this, Dan and Rebecca sprang to their feet. Wait, hold on a minute. If Billy and his wife get one, then we should too, they argued. Why should I split my assets with someone who called me a parasite? Wasn't it you who told me to stay away? I shot back sharply. Caught off guard, Dan and Rebecca began to stutter in response. I fixed them with a stern glare and pointed to the door. All right, the conversation is over. Please go home now. Wait, hold on, Mom. Please listen to me. Deanna approached me, flustered, and suddenly clung to my arm. I looked at him coldly. You have no right to call me Mom. Please, you can't just demand a share of the house and money too. We're struggling, the eldest daughter-in-law pleaded loudly. I raised an eyebrow. Struggling? What do you mean? I demanded. Dan hesitated before starting to explain. We thought we'd received Dad's inheritance and lived a bit too luxuriously. We kind of got into debt, he confessed. I forcefully shook off Dan's arm, feeling a surge of disgust. I didn't think you could be this stupid. This is the bed you've made, so you need to lie in it, Dan, I retorted sharply. That's just too cruel, the eldest couple protested, their faces crestfallen. I had the final say. From now on, I'll transfer my assets to Billy while I'm still alive. I won't give a penny to you who cut ties with me. Please never bother us again. Billy stood up to the deflated eldest couple. If you understand, then go home quickly. Don't come near Mom or us ever again," he declared firmly, escorting them to the door. After that, the eldest couple apparently ended up going bankrupt from the debt they incurred. From their rundown apartment, you could hear Dan and Rebecca arguing night after night. For them, who couldn't manage this simple act of cherishing their family, a decent future probably isn't in the cards. As for me, since I passed the house on to Billy, I bought and moved into an apartment nearby that comes with caregiving services. Billy and his wife often come to visit, and they've recently had an adorable baby. I want to continue building a good relationship with Billy's family and cherish each and every day.
My name's Laura. I used to think I had it all figured out. A good job as deputy head of finance at a big company, a husband, and a young son. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. At least, that's what I thought. My husband, Tom, worked in electronics sales. His income was all over the place. Some months he'd bring home a fat paycheck, others he'd barely scrape by. But we made it work. For 7 years, we'd been saving up to buy a house. It wasn't easy, but I was determined. Every spare penny went into our savings account. I'd clip coupons, buy generic brands, cook at home instead of eating out. Tom would grumble sometimes, but I thought he understood. It all fell apart on a Sunday afternoon. We were house hunting again, scrolling through listings online. Tom pointed at the screen, his eyes lighting up. "Look at this one, Laura. It's perfect." I leaned in to look. It was beautiful, I had to admit. Spacious, modern, with a big backyard. But when I saw the price tag, my heart sank. "Tom, we can't afford that. It's way out of our budget." I expected him to sigh and move on. We'd had this conversation before. But this time, something in him snapped. "Of course we can't afford it," he shouted, slamming his laptop shut. "We can never afford anything. All you do is save, save, save." He was on his feet now, pacing the room. "For the house, for Jimmy's education. But where's the payoff, huh? When do we get to actually enjoy life?" "Tom, calm down." "No, I won't calm down. I'm sick of this, Laura. Sick of pinching pennies, sick of never going anywhere nice, sick of wearing the same old clothes year after year. I deserve better than this. I deserve a better life, and a better wife." His words hit me like a slap in the face. I felt my cheeks burning, tears pricking at my eyes. But I swallowed hard, refusing to let them fall. "Tom, please," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Just take a deep breath. We need to be patient. We're almost there with our savings. Let's just calm down and talk about this." I thought my words would soothe him, that we could have a rational discussion. But I was wrong. Tom's face contorted with anger, and without another word, he stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I thought things would get better after Tom's outburst. But I couldn't have been more wrong. The next day, Tom came home with shopping bags full of designer clothes and a brand new smartwatch. I stared at him, confused. "What's all this?" I asked. He shrugged, a defiant glint in his eye. "Just treating myself." "Got a problem with that?" I bit my tongue, not wanting to start another fight. But over the next few weeks, it only got worse. Tom started blowing his entire paycheck on fancy restaurants, expensive gadgets, and nights out with his buddies. One night, as he was heading out the door in a new suit, I couldn't hold back anymore. "Tom, what about our savings? The house?" He turned to me, his face hard. "Life's too short, Laura. I'm done saving for some future that might never come. I want to live now." "But what about Jimmy's education?" I pressed. Tom scoffed. "My parents didn't pay for my education, and I turned out fine. He can get loans or scholarships. Besides, we can keep renting. No need to waste money on a house." I felt like I was talking to a stranger. This wasn't the man I married. As the weeks turned into months, Tom's behavior got more and more outrageous. He started staying out late nearly every night. On weekends, he'd suddenly have business trips, something that had never happened before in all his years at the company. And when he was home, it was like living with a constant critic. Nothing I did was right anymore. "Do you have to chew so loudly?" he'd snap at dinner. "That dress makes you look frumpy," he'd say as I got ready for work. "Can't you keep the house cleaner?" he'd complain, tossing his dirty socks on the floor. Every day, I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller under his constant barrage of criticism. I tried talking to him, tried to understand what had changed, but he'd just roll his eyes and walk away. 6 months. 6 long, miserable months of this new reality. I barely recognized my life anymore. The warm, loving home I thought we had built together had turned cold and hostile. Finally, one night, I'd had enough. Tom had just finished tearing into me about the dinner I'd cooked, a meal that used to be his favorite. "Tom," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "I think we need to live separately for a while." I expected argument, maybe even remorse. What I didn't expect was the look of relief that washed over his face. "Yeah," he said, nodding. "I think that's a good idea." His easy agreement felt like a punch to the gut. But it also confirmed what I'd been fearing for months: the man I loved, the life we'd built together, was already gone. The days after Tom left were a strange mix of loneliness and peace. I told myself this separation was temporary. That Tom would realize what he was missing, face the harsh realities of life on his own, and come back, appreciating everything we'd built together. I was so naive. It was a Tuesday evening when my phone started buzzing nonstop. At first, I ignored it, focusing on helping Jimmy with his homework. But when the notifications kept coming, I decided to check. The moment I opened my social media app, my heart stopped. There, at the top of my feed, was a photo that shattered my world. Tom, my husband, was standing on a yacht. His arm was wrapped around a stunning blonde with legs that seemed to go on forever. They were both grinning, the blue sea stretching out behind them. But it was the caption that really got me: "Starting a new life." I retreated to the kitchen, my hands shaking as I scrolled through the comments. Friends, family, co-workers, everyone was asking the same thing: who's that woman with Tom? Then, 5 days after the photo appeared, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Tom standing there, looking tanned and happy. Happier than I'd seen him in years. "We need to talk," he said, brushing past me into the house. I followed him into the living room, my heart pounding. "Tom, what's going on? Who was that woman in the photo?" He turned to face me, a smirk on his face that made my stomach turn. "That's Vanessa, my girlfriend." The room seemed to spin. "Girlfriend? But we're married." "We're just separated, Come on, Laura," he cut me off. "Let's not pretend. Our marriage has been over for a long time. Vanessa and we've been together for 6 months now." 6 months. The timeline clicked into place, his sudden change in behavior, the late nights, the business trips. I felt sick. "She's rich," Tom continued, oblivious to my distress. "And fun. She doesn't pinch pennies or obsess over saving. She lives for today. Plus," he added with a cruel smile, "she's a hell of a lot more interesting and beautiful than you. I want to marry Vanessa. Start fresh." I nodded slowly. In that moment, I realized our marriage had been over long before this conversation. Maybe it had been over the moment he'd slammed the door 6 months ago. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "If that's what you want, we'll get a divorce." Tom looked surprised, like he'd expected a fight. But I was done fighting. As he left, already on the phone with his lawyer, I sank onto the couch. The divorce proceedings were a blur of paperwork and legal jargon. Tom and I agreed on joint custody of Jimmy. I wanted Jimmy to have both parents in his life, despite the mess we'd made of our marriage. But even with the divorce finalized, I was far from okay. The betrayal, the public humiliation, the sudden upheaval of my entire life, it all hit me like a ton of bricks. I found myself struggling to get out of bed in the morning, barely able to focus at work. That's when I decided to see a therapist. Dr. Reynolds was a kind, older woman with gentle eyes. "Laura," she said in our first session, "what you're feeling is normal. You've experienced a significant trauma. But you're here, and that's the first step towards healing." Those sessions became my lifeline. Slowly, with Dr. Reynolds' help, I started to process my emotions, to understand that Tom's actions were about him, not me. For Jimmy's sake, I pushed myself to heal, to move forward. I threw myself into my work, started exercising, even joined a support group for divorced women. Bit by bit, I felt myself emerging from the fog of depression. Then Tom married Vanessa. I tried to be happy for Jimmy, he seemed to like her well enough. But things started to change. It began innocently enough. Tom asked to have Jimmy for a weekend here, an extra day there. I agreed, wanting to encourage their relationship. But soon, those weekends turned into weeks. "Jimmy," I asked one day, "don't you want to spend more time here at home?" He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Dad's place is more fun." That should have been my first warning sign. But I brushed it off, telling myself it was natural for a boy to want to spend time with his father. As the months went by, though, Jimmy spent less and less time with me. When he did come home, he was different. Distant. And he always seemed to have new clothes, new toys, stories of exciting trips and adventures. Finally, after yet another weekend where Jimmy begged to stay at his dad's, I sat him down for a talk. "Honey, what's going on? Don't you like being here anymore?" Jimmy fidgeted, still not meeting my eyes. "It's just, Dad and Mom let me do whatever I want." "Mom?" I echoed, confused. "Yeah, Vanessa. She buys me cool stuff all the time. We go to amusement parks and fancy restaurants. It's way more fun than here." His words felt like a slap in the face. "Jimmy, you know we can't afford." "That's the problem," he burst out. "You never want to spend money on anything fun. It's always save this, budget that. Dad says you're stuck in the past, always worrying about the future instead of living now." Things spiraled quickly after that. Jimmy started refusing to come home at all. When he did, he'd complain constantly, comparing my modest home unfavorably to Tom and Vanessa's lavish lifestyle. The final blow came on a rainy Tuesday. I'd been trying for days to get Jimmy to come home for dinner. When he finally arrived, he took one look around our living room and sneered. "God, this place is like a village barn compared to Dad's house. I don't want to live here anymore." The months slipped by, each one harder than the last. I watched from the sidelines as my son grew up, becoming more and more distant. Every time I reached out, I was met with indifference or outright hostility. Then came the day that shattered what was left of my world. It was Jimmy's 14th birthday. I'd hoped, foolishly perhaps, that he might want to spend it with me. Instead, I got a phone call that changed everything. "Mom," Jimmy's voice was cold, detached. "I need to talk to you about something important." We met at a cafe, neutral ground. Jimmy sat across from me, looking more like a stranger than my son. Then he dropped the bomb. "I want you to give up your parental rights," he said, his voice steady. "Vanessa wants to adopt me." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "What? Jimmy, I'm your mother." "No," he cut me off. "Vanessa's my mom. She's been there for me, she understands me. She and Dad can give me the life I want. And," he hesitated, then plowed on, "she can't have kids of her own. I want to be her son legally." I sat there, stunned, as Jimmy laid out their plan. Tom and Vanessa had already spoken to a lawyer. All they needed was my signature. Over the next few weeks, Tom and Vanessa pressed hard. Tom was triumphant, gloating. I wanted to fight. Every maternal instinct in me screamed to hold on to my son. But looking at Jimmy's face, seeing the determination there, I knew it would only push him further away. With a heavy heart, I signed the papers. The finality of it crushed me. I spiraled into a deep depression. If it hadn't been for my mother, I'm not sure I would have survived. She moved in with me, forcing me to eat, to get out of bed, to keep living. Slowly, painfully, I started to rebuild my life. I threw myself into work, started volunteering at a local animal shelter. Anything to fill the void left by Jimmy's absence. 3 years after the divorce, I met David. He was kind, successful, and patient. He listened as I poured out my story, offering support without judgment. When David proposed, I surprised myself by saying yes. As we exchanged vows, I felt a mix of joy and sadness. This wasn't the life I'd planned, but maybe it was the life I was meant to have. Just when I thought I had my new life figured out, I discovered I was pregnant. The news hit me like a tidal wave of emotions, joy, fear, excitement, and a twinge of sadness as I remembered the son I'd lost. David was over the moon. He'd always wanted children, but had never had the chance. We threw ourselves into preparing for the baby, transforming one of the rooms in our new house into a nursery. Oh, the house. It was everything I'd ever dreamed of and more. Spacious, with a beautiful garden and a view that took my breath away every morning. As I stood in the kitchen, my hand resting on my growing belly, I couldn't help but think how different this was from the life I'd had before. I tried not to think about Jimmy. He never called, never answered my messages. But I couldn't help myself from checking his social media accounts. At first, I told myself it was just to make sure he was okay. But as I scrolled through photos of lavish parties, expensive cars, and exotic vacations, I felt a growing unease. The carefree boy I'd raised was gone, replaced by a young man who seemed to value wealth and status above all else. I watched with a heavy heart as he posted about peasants who couldn't afford designer clothes, or complained about having to interact with common people at events. The final straw came when he shared a rant about how people below his level shouldn't be allowed in certain clubs. That day, with tears in my eyes, I unfollowed his accounts. It hurt too much to see what he'd become. Months passed, and our daughter, Emily, came into the world. As I looked into her tiny face, I silently promised her that I would never let her go, never let anyone take her from me. As Emily grew, we started taking family trips. Nothing extravagant, just weekend getaways to the beach or visits to nearby cities. I loved watching Emily's eyes light up at new experiences, hearing her delighted giggles as David swung her around in the waves. Life settled into a happy routine. I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be constantly on edge, always worried about money or the next argument. With David and Emily, I felt safe, loved, content. Then came the day that turned everything upside down again. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon. David had taken Emily to the entertainment center for some daddy-daughter time, and I was enjoying a rare moment of quiet, catching up on some reading in our living room. The doorbell rang, startling me. We weren't expecting any visitors. Curiously, I went to answer it. The moment I opened the door, my heart stopped. Standing on my doorstep, looking older and somehow both familiar and strange, was Jimmy. He was taller now, his boyish features sharpened into those of a young man. He was dressed expensively, a gold watch glinting on his wrist. But it was his eyes that caught me. They were hard, calculating, so different from the warm brown eyes I remembered. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice deeper than I remembered. "Long time no see." I stood frozen, unable to speak. Jimmy's eyes roamed past me, taking in the foyer with its high ceilings and elegant decor. He let out a low whistle. "Wow, nice place you've got here. Looks like you're not doing too bad for yourself." His tone was casual, almost mocking. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Jimmy," I finally managed to stammer. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" He shrugged, a smirk playing on his lips. "Grandma told me." "Don't worry, I had to work hard to get it out of her. She's quite protective of you." I made a mental note to thank my mother later. And to have a serious talk with her about boundaries. "Can I come in?" Jimmy asked, not waiting for an answer as he brushed past me into the house. I stood in the living room, watching as Jimmy sauntered in and sprawled across our pristine white couch like he owned the place. "What happened, Jimmy? Why are you here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, it's a real soap opera, Mom. Turns out my dear old stepmom wasn't as devoted as we all thought. Vanessa divorced Dad and kicked us both out of the house. Can you believe it? That impudent, gold-digging witch found herself a younger model and decided she didn't need us anymore." I winced at his crude language, but he was on a roll now. "Guess I bet on the wrong horse, huh?" He looked at me pointedly. "Should have stuck with good old reliable Mom instead of chasing the high life with that bitch." His words stung, bringing back all the pain of his rejection. But before I could respond, he switched gears. "But hey, water under the bridge, right? You're still my mom. We've got a lot of lost time to make up for." His tone was jovial, but there was something calculating in his eyes that made me uneasy. I took a deep breath. "Jimmy, I'm not sure it's that simple. You chose to cut me out of your life. Legally, I'm not your mother anymore." He waved his hand dismissively. "Technicalities. Blood is thicker than water and all that crap. Besides," he grinned, "think of all the money you saved not having to raise me these past few years. It's only fair you share some of that now, right?" And there it was. The real reason for his sudden reappearance in my life. "I'm sorry, Jimmy, but I can't just give you money," I said firmly. "I have responsibilities here. I have a daughter to raise." "Oh, so you replaced me, huh?" he interrupted, his laugh ugly and bitter. "Got yourself a shiny new kid and forgot all about your firstborn?" I felt my temper rising, but fought to stay calm. "It's not like that, Jimmy. Look, if you need help, maybe I could talk to David about getting you a job." "A job?" he scoffed, cutting me off again. "I don't need a job, I need cash." "Come on, Mom, you owe me." "I don't owe you anything," I said, my voice finally hardening. "You made your choice years ago. I'm sorry you're in a tough situation, but I can't just hand over money to you." His face darkened, all pretense of friendliness vanishing. "You selfish, fat witch," he snarled, jumping to his feet. "Dad was right to leave you. You're nothing but a nasty old hag who cares more about her bank account than her own son." Before I could respond, he stormed out, slamming the door so hard a picture fell off the wall. I sank onto the sofa, my legs no longer able to support me. Tears welled up in my eyes, spilling over as great, heaving sobs racked my body. This angry, entitled young man, how could this be my Jimmy? Where had I gone wrong? Was this my fault for not fighting harder to keep him? Or was this the inevitable result of the lifestyle Tom and Vanessa had given him? I don't know how long I sat there crying. All I know is that when I heard David's key in the lock, I hurriedly wiped my eyes, not wanting to worry him or Emily. But as soon as David walked in, Emily toddling beside him, he took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. "Laura, what happened?" he asked, concern etched on his features. I looked at my husband, then at my daughter, her innocent face turned up to me in confusion at seeing Mommy upset. In that moment, I made a decision. This was my family now. Jimmy had made his choice long ago, and I couldn't let his reappearance destroy the life I'd rebuilt. The morning after Jimmy's unexpected visit, my phone rang. It was my mother, her voice a mix of worry and excitement. "Laura, Jimmy came to see me. He needed money, so I lent him some. I thought you'd want to know he's okay." My heart sank. "Mom, please, don't give him any more money. He's not the Jimmy we knew. He doesn't want to work, he just wants easy money. Promise me you won't give him any more." After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table, my head in my hands. I knew this wasn't over. Sure enough, a few days later, my mother called again, this time terrified. Jimmy had come back, demanding more money, When she refused, he became aggressive, shouting and pounding on her door. That was the last straw. David and I immediately sprang into action. We left Emily with David's parents and moved into my mother's house for the week. We took turns staying awake, always on guard. The confrontation we'd been dreading finally came on a rainy Thursday night. Jimmy showed up, clearly drunk, pounding on the door and shouting for money. I opened the door, David right behind me. "Jimmy, you need to leave, now." His eyes were wild, unfocused. "Not until I get what's mine." He lunged forward, but David blocked him. "I'm warning you," Jimmy slurred, "I'll make you all sorry if you don't give me what I want." That's when David called the police. As we waited for them to arrive, Jimmy continued to rant and threaten us. My mother cowered in the background, clutching her chest. The sight of her fear and pain broke my heart. When the police arrived, they quickly subdued Jimmy and took him away. As the patrol car drove off, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Later that night, I reached out to Tom on social media, hoping he might be able to help Jimmy. His response was cold. "Not my problem anymore. Vanessa left me, took everything. I've got my own issues to deal with. Jimmy's on his own." Reading his words, I felt the last threads of my old life finally snap. The next day, I went to court and filed for a restraining order against Jimmy. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I knew it was necessary to protect my family. Months passed, then years. We never saw Jimmy again. Sometimes I'd lie awake at night, wondering where he was, if he was okay. But gradually, those sleepless nights became less frequent. Life went on. Emily grew into a bright, curious little girl. David's business flourished. One sunny afternoon, as I watched David pushing Emily on the swing in our backyard, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. This was my life now, not perfect, but filled with love, laughter, and joy. I'm Catherine, and I was born into what you'd call a typical American family. My dad, Jack, was this ambitious guy who'd started his own paint and varnish company from scratch. Mom, Sarah, was your classic housewife, always busy with chores and gossip. And then there was my older brother, Tom, 5 years my senior and the apple of my mother's eye. Dad was hardly ever around, buried in work and drowning in loans he'd taken out to get his business off the ground. When he did show up, he'd lock himself in his office, muttering about invoices and profit margins. Mom, well, she made it clear from day one that Tom was her favorite. "Oh, Tommy, you're my joy, my everything," she'd coo, even when he came home reeking of cheap beer or with a black eye from another fight. Me? I was just there. An afterthought, really. Don't get me wrong, Dad loved me in his own way. He'd try to make up for his absence with gifts. For my 9th birthday, he gave me this clunky video camera. "Capture our family moments, sweetheart," he said with a tired smile. Little did he know how that camera would change everything. I remember this one Sunday when I was about 10. Dad had promised to take us to the park, but surprise, surprise, he got called into work. Mom lost it. "Jack, for Christ's sake. It's Sunday," she screamed, her face red with anger. "Your kids need you. I need you." I stood in the hallway, that damn camera in my hand, recording it all. They didn't even notice me. Dad's voice dropped to a whisper. "If you'd just help out with the business." Mom laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Help out? With your pipe dream? Wake up, Jack. You're drowning us in debt for a business that's going nowhere." I lowered the camera, my heart pounding. This wasn't the first fight I'd witnessed, but it was the worst. I didn't fully understand what was happening, but I knew our family was falling apart. As the days went by, the tension in our house grew thicker. Dad spent more time at work, and when he was home, the silence between him and Mom was deafening. Tom started acting out more, coming home late, reeking of cigarettes, and God knows what else. One night, I woke up to the sound of breaking glass. I crept downstairs, camera in hand. It had become a sort of security blanket for me. Mom was standing in the kitchen, surrounded by shattered pieces of what used to be her favorite vase. "Mom?" I whispered. She turned to me, her eyes glazed over. "Go back to bed, Kath," she slurred. That's when I noticed the half-empty wine bottle on the counter. The next day, everything seemed normal again. Mom made pancakes, Dad read the newspaper, and Tom slouched over his cereal. But I knew better now. I knew that beneath the surface, our family was cracking like that vase. It was just another Tuesday when my world exploded. I was 10, Tom was 15, and neither of us had any clue what was about to hit us. I was in my room, fiddling with my camera, when I heard the front door slam. Dad's voice boomed through the house, angrier than I'd ever heard it. "Sarah, get down here now." Curious and scared, I crept to the top of the stairs, camera in hand. Force of habit, I guess. Mom sauntered into the living room, looking annoyed. "What's got your panties in a twist, Jack?" Dad's face was red, his hands shaking as he thrust a manila envelope at her. "Care to explain this?" I zoomed in on Mom's face. She looked different. Not scared or sorry, but almost relieved. "Well," Dad demanded. "What do you have to say for yourself?" Mom tossed the papers aside and laughed. It was a cold, harsh sound that made me shiver. "What do you want me to say, Jack?" "That I'm sorry? You want the truth? I've been cheating on you for years. And you know what? I enjoyed every minute of it." I gasped, almost dropping my camera. Dad looked like he'd been punched in the gut. "Why, Sarah, why would you do this?" "Because you were never here, Jack," Mom exploded. "You and your damn business. Did you really think I'd sit around waiting for you forever?" "I did it for us," Dad said weakly. "For our family." Mom scoffed. "Family? What family?" "We've been broken for years, Jack." I was just the first one to admit it. The argument went on for hours. I recorded every painful minute of it, even though my arms ached and my eyes burned with unshed tears. They never noticed me standing there, too caught up in their own drama. The next few weeks were a blur. There were hushed phone calls, slammed doors, and more shouting matches than I could count. Tom retreated further into his own world, spending most of his time locked in his room. Finally, one night, Mom and Dad sat us down. "Kids," Mom began. "Your dad and I, we're getting a divorce. Catherine, sweetie, you'll be staying with your father. And Tom, you'll be coming with me." Tom shrugged, like he couldn't care less. But I saw the relief in his eyes. Dad was generous, he left the house to Mom, and also started paying child support for Tom. The move was quick and painless, at least physically. Our new apartment was small, nothing like the house we'd left behind. But it was ours, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. It wasn't easy, though. Dad worked longer hours than ever, trying to keep the business afloat and pay for everything. Some nights, I'd find him at the kitchen table, head in his hands, surrounded by bills. 5 years flew by in a blur of homework, part-time jobs, and watching Dad struggle to keep his business afloat. I was 15 when everything changed again, but this time, it was for the better. Her name was Rachel, and she waltzed into our lives like a whirlwind. I remember the day Dad introduced us. He had this goofy grin on his face, one I hadn't seen in years. "Catherine, this is Rachel. She used to intern at the company, and now, well, we're seeing each other." Rachel smiled warmly. "It's great to finally meet you, Catherine. Your dad talks about you all the time." I sized her up, ready to hate her on principle. But there was something about Rachel that made it impossible. She was genuine, kind, and she looked at Dad like he hung the moon. It didn't take long for Rachel to become a permanent fixture in our lives. She moved in a few months later, and suddenly, our tiny apartment felt like a home again. One night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. "Jack, my dad's willing to finance that new production line you've been dreaming about," Rachel said. "He believes in you, Jack." "We both do." I peeked around the corner to see Dad pull Rachel into a tight hug. "What did I do to deserve you?" he whispered. It hit me then. This was what love should look like. Not the bitter, resentful mess I'd grown up with, but this: support, trust, and genuine happiness. The next few years were like watching a rocket take off. With Rachel's connections and Dad's expertise, the business skyrocketed. The new paint line was a hit in Rachel's dad's hardware stores, and soon, orders were pouring in from all over the country. I'd catch Dad and Rachel working late into the night, heads bent over spreadsheets, arguing good-naturedly about expansion plans. But unlike the arguments I remembered from my childhood, these always ended with laughter and a kiss. "Why don't you two just get married already?" I asked one day over dinner. They shared a look and burst out laughing. "Oh, sweetie," Rachel said, wiping tears from her eyes. "Our love doesn't need a government stamp of approval." I rolled my eyes, but I got it. They were happy, and that's all that mattered. As for me, well, I was doing pretty well too. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make Dad proud. When I graduated college, there was no question about what I wanted to do next. And just like that, we became an unstoppable trio. Dad with his industry knowledge, Rachel with her business savvy, and me with fresh ideas from college. We were unstoppable. 10 years after Rachel came into our lives, Dad was rich. Like, private jet and vacation homes rich. It was surreal. Mom and Tom, well, that's a whole other can of worms. I hadn't spoken to either of them in years. Not since that disastrous Thanksgiving when Mom got drunk and called Rachel a home-wrecking whore. Tom supported her and called me a traitor. I'd left in tears that night, vowing never to subject myself to that again. Sometimes, I'd see Mom's name pop up in my phone, or get a random text from Tom asking for money. I always ignored them. It hurt, but I'd made my choice. I chose happiness, success, and love. Life has a cruel way of pulling the rug out from under you, just when everything seems perfect. For us, that moment came on a sunny Saturday in June. Dad had been talking about bungee jumping for weeks. "Life's too short to play it safe," he'd say, eyes twinkling with excitement. Rachel and I tried to talk him out of it, but you know how Dad was when he set his mind to something. The call came just after noon. I remember every excruciating detail. The trembling voice of the bungee instructor. The words "heart attack" and "didn't make it" echoing in my ears. The sound of Rachel's coffee mug shattering on the kitchen floor. It didn't feel real. Dad, gone? The man who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd weathered every storm life threw at him, taken down by a stupid bungee jump. The funeral was, well, it was a show, to put it bluntly. It seemed like half the city had turned up to pay their respects. Business partners in somber suits, employees with red-rimmed eyes, friends and relatives we hadn't seen in years. Dad would have hated all the fuss, but it warmed my heart to see how many lives he'd touched. And then Mom and Tom showed up. I almost didn't recognize them at first. Mom looked old, her face puffy and lined, eyes bloodshot. Tom slouched beside her, all muscle and attitude, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. They sat a few rows behind us, but their voices carried. "Well, Jack finally got what was coming to him," Mom's voice slurred. I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. How dare they? How fucking dare they come here and disrespect Dad like this? But it got worse. You know, Mom's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow seemed louder than before. I heard his little girlfriend arranged the whole thing. Paid for the bungee jump herself. Probably knew his heart couldn't take it. Wanted to get her hands on his money, I bet. I couldn't take it anymore. I whirled around, my vision blurred with tears and rage. "Shut up," I hissed. "Just shut the hell up. How dare you come here and spread your poisonous lies?" Dad loved Rachel, and she loved him. This was a terrible accident, nothing more. So if you can't show some basic human decency and respect, then just leave. Nobody wants you here anyway. The church fell silent. All eyes were on us. Mom stood up, swaying slightly. Come on, Tom, we're leaving. Let them have their little pity party. We'll see them at the will reading. The rest of the funeral passed in a haze of grief and anger. But as we stood by Dad's grave, watching the casket being lowered, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of our troubles. 2 weeks after we laid Dad to rest, we all gathered in Mr. Goldstein's office for the reading of the will. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Rachel sat beside me, her face a mask of calm. Mom slouched in her chair, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. Tom stood by the window, arms crossed, scowling at nothing in particular. Mr. Goldstein cleared his throat and began reading. I, Jack Thompson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby. I tuned out the legal jargon, my heart pounding. And then, to my daughter, Catherine, I leave all my worldly possessions, including all properties, bank accounts, and full ownership of Thompson Paint and Varnish Company. The room went deadly silent. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Mr. Goldstein continued, to my ex-wife, Sarah, and my son, Thomas, I leave the sum of $20,000 each. What? Mom's shriek made us all jump. This is bullshit. That business was my idea. I sacrificed everything for Jack and that goddamn company. I raised his children while he was off playing businessman. That company is rightfully mine. I glanced at Rachel. She sat there, calm as ever, but I could see the slight tremor in her hands. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, Dad built that company from nothing. You didn't even believe in him when he started. She rounded on me, eyes blazing. You ungrateful little brat. I should have known you'd side with him. You always were Daddy's little girl, weren't you? I took a deep breath. Look, I don't want to fight. If it'll make you feel better, I'll give you $100,000. Just, please, let's end this here. Mom laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. $100,000? You think you can buy me off that easily? No, sweetheart, I'm going to sue. I'm going to take every last penny that son of a bitch owed me. Enough, Mr. Goldstein's voice cut through the argument. The will is clear and legally binding. If you wish to contest it, Mrs. Thompson, you're welcome to do so through the proper legal channels. Now, if there's nothing else, I think we're done here. Mom stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Tom followed, but not before shooting me a look that could curdle milk. As Rachel and I left the office, I felt a weight settle on my shoulders. Dad's company, his legacy, it was all mine now. And apparently, so were his problems. After the disaster at Mr. Goldstein's office, Rachel and I retreated to Dad's, my penthouse. The silence was deafening as we both tried to process what had just happened. Rachel, I said, breaking the quiet. We need to talk about the business. I want you to have a part of it. 20%. Rachel's eyes widened in shock. Catherine, no, your father left it to you. It's yours. I shook my head. It's ours. You've invested so much in it, not just money, but time and energy. You helped build it into what it is today. It's only fair. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Before I knew it, she had engulfed me in a tight hug. Thank you, she whispered. Jack would be so proud of you. We signed the papers that afternoon. It felt right, like I was honoring Dad's memory and securing our future all at once. But of course, Mom couldn't let us have even this small victory. The lawsuit came 2 weeks later. Mom was demanding the entire business and most of Dad's property. Her lawyer threw around phrases like marital assets and unjust enrichment, but it all boiled down to one thing: she wanted what she thought Dad owed her. The next few months were a blur of court appearances, depositions, and sleepless nights. Rachel and I threw ourselves into running the company, determined not to let Mom's vendetta derail everything Dad had worked for. In the end, the judge rejected Mom's claims. The will stood. I thought that would be the end of it, but I should have known better. It was during the final hearing that Mom's lawyer dropped the bomb. Your Honor, we've just learned that Ms. Thompson has transferred a significant portion of the business to Rachel Carson, the deceased's girlfriend. In light of this new information, we'd like to file a separate suit against Ms. Carson. My heart sank. I glanced at Rachel, who had gone pale. On what grounds? The judge asked, sounding as tired as I felt. Alienation of affection, Your Honor. We have reason to believe Ms. Carson engaged in an affair with the deceased years ago, leading to the breakdown of my client's marriage. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was a lie, all of it. But as I looked at Mom's triumphant face, I realized she didn't care about the truth. She just wanted to hurt us, to take what she thought was hers. As we left the courthouse that day, reporters swarmed us, shoving microphones in our faces and shouting questions. Ms. Thompson, did you know about your father's affair? Ms. Carson, how long were you involved with Jack Thompson? Is it true you're giving away your inheritance to your father's mistress? Rachel grabbed my hand and pulled me through the crowd. No comment, she repeated, her voice steady even as I could feel her hand shaking in mine. Once we were safely in the car, I broke down. I'm so sorry, Rachel. This is all my fault. If I hadn't given you part of the company. Stop, Rachel said firmly. You did nothing wrong. Your mother, she's hurt and angry, and she's lashing out. But we're going to get through this. Together. I nodded, wiping my eyes. Together, I echoed. As our driver navigated through the city traffic, I couldn't help but wonder, how much more would we have to endure before this was over? And at what cost? The day of the trial arrived, and I felt like I was going to be sick. The idea of testifying against my own mother made my stomach churn, but I knew it was necessary. Rachel deserved justice, and Mom needed to face the consequences of her actions. As I sat in the witness stand, I could feel Mom's glare burning into me. But I focused on Rachel's encouraging smile and found the strength to speak. Your Honor, I began, my voice surprisingly steady, I have evidence that directly contradicts my mother's claims. The courtroom fell silent as I explained about the old videos I'd found. With shaking hands, I presented the tapes to the court. The first video played, showing a much younger version of my parents in our old living room. Mom's voice, slurred but clear, filled the courtroom. You want the truth, Jack? Fine. I've been cheating on you for years. And you know what? I don't regret it one bit. I couldn't look at Mom, but I heard her sharp intake of breath. The video continued, laying bare all of her infidelities and lies. Next, I presented the detective's report Dad had kept. It detailed Mom's affairs with dates, times, and photographic evidence. As you can see, Your Honor, I concluded, my mother's claims of my father having an affair with Rachel are completely false. In fact, it was my mother who was unfaithful throughout their marriage. The judge's face was grim as he reviewed the evidence. Mom's lawyer looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. When the verdict came, it was decisive. The judge not only dismissed Mom's case against Rachel, but also ordered her to pay all legal fees. Mom didn't take it well, she insulted Rachel and me, saying things you wouldn't expect to hear from your own mother. She continued her tirade, spewing profanities until the judge had no choice but to fine her for contempt of court. As the bailiffs escorted her out, she turned to me, her eyes blazing with hatred. This isn't over, Catherine. You'll regret this, I swear to God. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A few days later, Rachel burst into my office, her face pale. She handed me her phone. On the screen was Mom's Facebook page, filled with posts about our company. Thompson Paint is drowning in debt, one post screamed. Catherine Thompson is running it into the ground. Another claimed, inside source reveals, Catherine Thompson planning to flee to Mexico with company funds. We spent the next 48 hours in crisis mode. We issued statements to our employees and customers, assuring them of the company's financial stability. Our legal team drafted a cease and desist letter to Mom, threatening a libel lawsuit if she didn't retract her statements. To my surprise, it worked. Maybe Mom finally realized she'd gone too far, or maybe she just ran out of fight. Whatever the reason, she posted a retraction the next day. I, Sarah Thompson, hereby retract my previous statements regarding Thompson Paint and Varnish Company and its CEO, Catherine Thompson. My claims were unfounded and made in anger. I sincerely apologize for any confusion or distress my words may have caused. As I read her words, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. This woman, who had once been my mother, was now nothing more than a bitter stranger intent on destroying everything Dad had built. 2 months passed in relative peace. The company was thriving, and Rachel and I had settled into a comfortable routine. The wounds from the legal battles were slowly healing, and I dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, we could move on. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It was a crisp autumn evening, and I was heading to my car after a long day at the office. The parking lot was nearly empty, the setting sun casting long shadows across the asphalt. As I fumbled for my keys, a familiar voice made me freeze. "Catherine?" I turned slowly, hardly believing my eyes. There, looking small and worn, stood my mother. "Mom?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" She shuffled her feet, not quite meeting my eyes. "I've been thinking about your offer. The $100,000. Is that offer still on the table? I take it and leave you alone." For a moment, I was speechless. Then, to my own surprise, I started laughing. It wasn't a happy laugh, but a tired, incredulous one. "Are you serious?" I finally managed to say. "After everything you put us through? The lawsuits, the slander, the lies?" Mom's face hardened. "Now listen here, young lady." "No, you listen," I cut her off, feeling years of pent-up frustration pouring out. "That offer expired the moment you decided to drag us through court. It's gone, Mom. Just like any respect or affection I had left for you." She paled, then flushed with anger. "You ungrateful little—" "I'm not finished," I said, my voice cold. "If you ever try to threaten me or slander our company again, I will sue you for every penny you have left. And trust me, I'll win." Without waiting for a response, I got into my car and drove away, watching her shrinking figure in my rearview mirror. It felt like the end of a chapter, but also the beginning of something new. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Rachel and I threw ourselves into work, expanding the company in ways Dad had only dreamed of. We launched a new eco-friendly paint line, opened 3 new factories, and even started a scholarship program for aspiring young entrepreneurs. Through it all, Dad's memory was our guiding light. We kept his photo on the wall of our main conference room, a constant reminder of where we came from and what we were working towards. Dad was gone, but his legacy lived on through us. Through the company he'd built from nothing, through the love he'd shared with Rachel, and through the strength he'd instilled in me. And as for me and Rachel? We were more than just business partners. We were family. Bound not by blood, but by love, respect, and a shared dream. My name's Amelia, and I was born with cerebral palsy. Now, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, growing up wasn't exactly a walk in the park. My parents? Well, let's just say they had a hard time wrapping their heads around having a kid like me. My brain works just fine, but my spine's got a mind of its own, and my left arm? It's a bit of a slacker. All this adds up to make me look a bit different from your average Joe, or Jane, in my case. I remember those early days, even though I was just a tiny thing. My mom, she couldn't even bring herself to hold me at first. It was like I was some kind of alien or something. Instead, I had this nanny taking care of me. She was nice enough, I guess, but it wasn't the same as having your mom there, you know? The nanny was my grandmother's idea. Grandma, now there's a woman who knew how to love. She didn't give a damn about how I looked or moved. To her, I was just her granddaughter, plain and simple. She was loaded, which came in handy more times than I can count. As I got older, things didn't exactly improve on the home front. Walking was a real pain in the ass, literally. I'd take a few steps, then bam. Faceplant on the floor. And my mom? She'd just stand there, watching me struggle. "You need to learn to get up on your own, Amelia," she'd say, not even trying to hide the disgust in her voice. But I wasn't stupid. I knew she just didn't want to touch me. It was like I had cooties or something. Things really took a turn when I hit the big 0 to 5. Mom got pregnant again, and 9 months later, out pops my little sister. Talk about a golden child. This kid was everything I wasn't: cute, bouncy, and most importantly to my mom, normal. From that day on, it was like I'd become invisible. Mom was all about her new baby girl. She'd spend hours taking selfies with her, posting them all over social media. "Look at my beautiful daughter," she'd write, and I'd think, what about me? Aren't I your daughter too? As I got older, things didn't exactly improve on the mobility front. Crutches became my constant companions, and on bad days, I'd roll around in a wheelchair. It wasn't ideal, but hey, you gotta work with what you've got, right? My mom would always come up with these excuses why I couldn't go out. "Oh, Amelia, it's not safe for you in other people's houses," she'd say. Or, "The shopping center isn't equipped for someone like you, sweetie." But I wasn't born yesterday. Even at that young age, I could see right through her bullshit. It wasn't about my safety or comfort, she was just embarrassed to be seen with me. God forbid her friends see her with her special daughter. So, my childhood became a never-ending cycle of 4 walls and a ceiling. While my sister got to experience the world, make friends, and create memories, I was stuck at home, watching life pass me by through the window. My parents didn't even try to hide the fact that they hated going anywhere with me. It was like I was some kind of burden they were forced to carry. When school time rolled around, you'd think things might change, right? Fat chance. Instead of sending me to a regular school where I might actually interact with kids my age, my parents insisted that Grandma foot the bill for a specialized school. "It's for the best, Amelia," Dad would say, not quite meeting my eyes. "You'll be with kids who understand you better." What he really meant was, "We don't want you embarrassing us at a normal school." But hey, who needs social skills and diverse experiences, am I right? So off I went, every day, driven by a nanny Grandma hired. Don't get me wrong, the nanny was nice enough, but it wasn't the same as having your mom or dad drop you off, you know? Now, Grandma, she was a whole different story. While my parents were busy pretending I didn't exist, Grandma was all about helping me thrive. "Amelia, my dear," she'd say, her eyes twinkling, "how about we take a little trip this weekend?" And just like that, I'd find myself on adventures I never thought possible. We'd visit museums, go to the park, even take short trips to nearby cities. For the first time in my life, I felt like a normal kid. Grandma didn't stop there, though. She was determined to give me every opportunity to improve. Massages, physical therapy, experimental treatments, you name it, she paid for it. "With the right care, there's nothing you can't do, Amelia," she'd tell me, her voice full of conviction. "You're going to have a wonderful life, full of friends and joy. You'll see." I remember this one time, after a particularly grueling therapy session, I was feeling pretty down on myself. Grandma noticed, of course, she always did. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked, sitting down next to me. "Why bother with all this, Grandma?" I said, gesturing at my uncooperative body. "It's not like I'm ever going to be normal." She took my face in her hands, forcing me to look at her. "Amelia, listen to me. There's no such thing as normal. Everyone's got their own struggles, their own challenges. Yours are just a bit more visible, that's all. But that doesn't make you any less worthy of love, of friendship, of a full and happy life. You hear me? That was Grandma for you. Always ready with a hug, a word of encouragement, or a surprise treat. She believed in me when no one else did, not even myself. And slowly but surely, I started to believe too. It was Grandma's birthday, and she dropped a bombshell on us. She wanted to celebrate at a fancy restaurant. Now, for most families, this wouldn't be a big deal. But for us, it was like she'd suggested we all go skydiving. The next day, Mom came into my room with a forced smile. "Amelia, honey, Grandma's having a birthday dinner at a restaurant. But you're not feeling well, right? It's probably best if you stay home." I knew the drill. I was supposed to nod and agree, be the good, understanding daughter. But something in me snapped. "Actually, Mom, I feel fine. I'd love to go to Grandma's dinner." The color drained from her face. "Oh, but the restaurant might not be accessible. And you know how tired you get. It's really better if you stay home." Before I could argue, the doorbell rang. Mom's eyes widened in panic. "That's Grandma. Quick, get in bed and pretend you're sick." But it was too late. Grandma bustled in, took one look at me sitting up in my wheelchair, and smiled knowingly. "There's my girl. All ready for dinner, I see." Mom started sputtering some excuse about me being ill, but Grandma wasn't having it. She walked right up to me, put her hand on my head, and declared, "Doesn't feel like a fever to me. Come on, Amelia, let's get you to that restaurant." And just like that, we were all piling into Grandma's car, me in my wheelchair, my sister in her frilly new dress, and my parents looking like they were headed to a funeral instead of a birthday celebration. The restaurant was buzzing when we arrived. I saw relatives I hadn't seen in years, and to my surprise, they seemed genuinely happy to see me. As we settled in for dinner, I couldn't help but notice how Mom positioned herself as far from me as possible. She was chatting and laughing with everyone else, but it was like I didn't exist. I tried my best to eat neatly, I really did. But sometimes my hand just doesn't cooperate, you know? I saw Mom wince every time I dropped food or made a mess. Grandma, bless her heart, didn't miss a beat. She helped me when I needed it, chatted with me like I was the most interesting person at the table, and made sure I was comfortable. At one point, she called out Mom. "Susan, why aren't you helping Amelia with her meal?" Mom's face flushed red. She quickly scooped up my sister and plastered on a fake smile. "Oh, I can't manage both girls at once, Mom. You know how it is." I saw the flash of anger in Grandma's eyes, but before she could say anything, Dad stood up abruptly. "Well, this has been lovely, but I think it's time we headed home. Amelia looks tired." I wasn't tired. I was having the time of my life. But I knew better than to argue. As Dad wheeled me out, I caught sight of Grandma's face. She looked sad and disappointed, but she gave me a little wink. It was her way of saying, "Don't worry, I've got your back." As we drove home in silence, I couldn't help but think about the evening. Yeah, it had been awkward and uncomfortable at times. But for a few brief moments, I'd felt like part of a real family. And you know what? That feeling was worth all the awkwardness in the world. The feeling of awkwardness accompanied me all my childhood. Whenever we had visitors, you know, the normal people my parents actually wanted to associate with, I'd get the same old song and dance. "Amelia," Mom would say, her voice sickly sweet, "why don't you go to your room for a bit? We're having company." At first, it stung. But over time I got used to it. So, I'd will myself into my room, shut the door, and wait. I'd hear the laughter, the chatter, the sounds of a normal family having a normal time. And I'd sit there, alone, trying not to feel like a freak in my own home. But you know what? I'm nothing if not adaptable. I taught myself to cook, even though my hands shook and I dropped more than a few plates along the way. I learned to draw, pouring my feelings onto paper when I couldn't express them out loud. And I wrote. Boy, did I write. Poems mostly, little snippets of emotion that I could never quite say out loud. The funny thing is, for a while there, I thought I had an ally in all this. My little sister, when she was just a tiny thing, she used to love me. Like, really love me. She'd toddle into my room, all big eyes and chubby cheeks, and just want to be near me. I remember this one time, she must have been about 3. She came into my room while I was drawing. "Mia," she squealed, she couldn't quite manage Amelia yet. "Draw me." So I did. It wasn't great, mind you, a wobbly circle for a head, stick arms, and legs. But to her, it was a masterpiece. She hugged that paper like it was made of gold. But then Mom walked in. The look on her face when she saw her precious baby girl cuddled up next to me? You'd think she'd caught her playing in mud. "Sarah," she snapped. "Come here, get away from your sister." Sarah looked confused. "But Mommy, Mia drawing me." Mom snatched the picture away. "That's nice, honey, but let's go play in your room instead, okay?" And just like that, it started. Every time Sarah tried to get close to me, Mom would pull her away. Like I was contagious or something. And over time? Well, Sarah learned. She stopped coming to my room, stopped asking me to play or draw for her. By the time she hit her teens, she was just like Mom. I'd hear her giggling with her friends in the living room, but I knew better than to go out there. One day, I wheeled myself out to get a glass of water, forgetting she had friends over. The look of horror on her face when she saw me? It was like looking at a mini version of Mom. "Amelia," she hissed. "Go back to your room. My friends are here." And just like that, I was back in my sanctuary, my prison, my room. But you know what? It didn't hurt as much as it used to. Because in that room, I wasn't Amelia the freak, Amelia the embarrassment. I was just Amelia. The girl who could cook a mean omelet, draw pictures that made people smile, even if those people were just me and Grandma, and write poems that captured all the things I couldn't say out loud. Meanwhile, life went on, and graduation came. Man, what a mix of emotions that was. There I was, surrounded by my classmates, other special kids like me. And you know what? For once, I felt normal. We were all different in our own ways, but here, in this moment, we were the same. Kids who'd made it despite the odds. I remember looking around at all the smiling faces, the proud parents, the teary-eyed teachers. And for a moment, just a moment, I let myself feel proud too. I'd done it. Despite everything, I'd actually done it. But then reality came crashing back. My eyes scanned the crowd, searching for familiar faces. Mom, Dad, Sarah? Nope, nope, and nope. They were probably sipping cocktails on some beach right about now, enjoying their much-needed family vacation. Funny how their idea of family never seemed to include me. But you know who was there? Grandma. Front and center, beaming like I'd just won the Nobel Prize or something. When they called my name, I swear her cheers were loud enough to shake the rafters. Fast forward a few months, and suddenly the house was buzzing with excitement. Mom and Dad's 20th wedding anniversary was coming up, and they'd decided to go all out. They were making a whole damn movie about their happy family life. I remember thinking, well, this should be interesting. For 2 weeks straight, it was like living in some bizarre reality show. We were dragged from location to location, the local entertainment center, some picturesque nature spot, even a yacht. Where'd they even get a yacht? We'd change clothes more times than I could count, pose for endless photos, record cheesy congratulations, and even sing songs. It was exhausting, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't also kind of fun. For once, I was included. Sure, Mom would fuss about how to position my wheelchair so it looked natural, and Dad would get this pinched look on his face whenever the photographer had to take extra time to get me in the shot. But I was there. I was part of it. I even wrote a special poem for Mom and Dad. Spent weeks on it, actually. Agonized over every word, practicing in front of my mirror until I could recite it without stumbling. When it came time to record it, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Mom, Dad, I started, my voice shaky but determined. 20 years of love and life, of joy and strife. Through all the ups and downs, you've stood strong, a testament to love's enduring song. I kept going, pouring my heart out in verse. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. I looked up, half expecting to see tears in their eyes or something. Instead, Mom was fussing with Sarah's hair, and Dad was checking his watch. "That was nice, Amelia," Mom said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Very creative. Now, let's get Sarah set up for her piano piece, shall we?" And just like that, my moment was over. But you know what? I didn't let it get me down. Because for those 2 weeks, I'd been part of something. I'd contributed. And even if they couldn't appreciate it, I knew I'd done something special. The big day was approaching fast. The director had been working his magic, weaving together our new footage with clips from the family archives. I was buzzing with excitement, eager to see how it all came together. When the finished product arrived, I wheeled myself into the living room, ready for the grand unveiling. But Mom quickly intercepted me. "Oh, Amelia," she said, that fake sweetness coating her words like cheap syrup, "we're saving it for the party. You'll see it with everyone else. It'll be more special that way." Finally, the day of the anniversary party arrived. Grandma's place was decked out like something out of a movie itself. Her sprawling lawn had been transformed into an outdoor cinema, with plush pillows scattered across the grass for seating. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over everything, guests started to arrive. "All right, everyone," Dad called out, clinking his glass for attention. "If you'd all like to take a seat, we're about to start the show." There was a flurry of movement as people settled onto the pillows. I stayed in my wheelchair, parked next to Grandma. She gave my hand a squeeze as the movie began to play. The opening shot was of Mom and Dad on their wedding day. They looked so young, so happy. Mom's dress was beautiful, and Dad couldn't take his eyes off her. I felt a lump form in my throat. Then came a montage of their early years together. Vacations, parties, lazy Sundays at home. They looked so in love, so carefree. I searched each frame, waiting for my entrance. But as the timeline of their lives unfolded on the screen, a sinking feeling began to grow in my stomach. There were shots of them with friends, with colleagues, with other family members. But I was nowhere to be seen. Then came footage of Mom's pregnancy, and my heart leapt. This is it, I thought. This is where I come in. But no. The next shot was of Sarah as a newborn, Mom cradling her with a look of pure adoration. Dad hovering proudly nearby. The movie continued, showing Sarah growing up. Her first steps, first day of school, dance recitals, family vacations. It was like watching a parallel universe where I didn't exist. Then came the footage from our recent shoots. I held my breath, waiting to see myself on screen. There was our family, singing and dancing, looking like the picture-perfect unit. But I wasn't there. It was as if I'd been erased, cut out of every frame. As the reality of what I was seeing sank in, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This wasn't some mistake or oversight. This was deliberate. They'd erased me. My own family had wiped me from their history. Grandma took one look at my face, and something in her snapped. She marched over to the projector and shut it off. The lawn was plunged into an awkward silence. "Susan, David," Grandma's voice, cut through the night air like a knife. "What the hell is this?" The guests started murmuring uncomfortably. Dad stepped forward, trying to calm things down. "Now, Mom, let's not make a scene." But Grandma was just getting started. "Make a scene? You want to talk about making a scene? How about erasing your child from your family history? That's one hell of a scene if you ask me." Mom's face had gone pale. "It's not like that," she stammered. "The photographer said Amelia wasn't photogenic. We were just trying to put our best foot forward." Grandma let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, that's rich, Susan. Shall we talk about how you wanted to abandon her the day she was born? How I had to promise financial support just to get you to keep your own child? gasps rippled through the crowd. I felt like I was going to be sick. I've supported this family for years, Grandma continued. Paid for your vacations, your luxuries. All I asked was that you love your daughter. And you couldn't even do that. Suddenly, Sarah jumped up. Shut up, she screamed. Just shut up. Amelia's a cripple, she's embarrassing. I didn't want her in the video either. The silence that followed was deafening. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own sister. Grandma turned to my parents, her voice cold. Well done. You've raised one daughter to be just as intolerant as you are. Then she dropped the bombshell. You know what? I'm done. Amelia is now my sole heir. Every penny I have will go to her. Mom exploded. Are you insane? What does she need money for? She needs a full-time nurse, not a fortune. Get out, Grandma said quietly. When they didn't move, she repeated it louder. Get out of my house. Get out of my life. I'm done supporting your comfortable little existence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Mom laughed nervously. Come on, Mom. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life, Grandma cut her off. Leave. Now. And don't come back. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. My parents and Sarah, looking shell-shocked, gathered their things and left. Grandma slammed the door behind them with a finality that echoed across the lawn. As the dust settled, I became aware of movement around me. The guests, who had witnessed this whole ugly scene, were approaching me one by one. Aunt Karen hugged me tightly. Uncle Jim patted my shoulder awkwardly but sincerely. Even some of my parents' friends, people who had never so much as looked at me before, came up to express their support. So, there I was, suddenly living in Grandma's big house. Talk about a plot twist, right? It was like stepping into a whole new world, one where I wasn't a dirty little secret to be hidden away, but a person worthy of love and respect. About a week after the great family meltdown, that's what I started calling it in my head, Grandma sat me down for a chat. All right, Amelia, she said, that familiar twinkle in her eye. Let's talk about your future. What do you want to do with your life? I blinked at her, caught off guard. No one had ever really asked me that before. It was always assumed I'd just exist, I guess. Be taken care of. But never have dreams of my own. I don't know, I stammered. I never thought. Well, start thinking, Grandma said, not unkindly. The world's your oyster now, kiddo. What do you love doing? And just like that, it hit me. I love writing, I said, my voice growing stronger. And drawing. I want to create things, Grandma. Beautiful things. Grandma's face lit up like a Christmas tree. Well, why didn't you say so? We'll get you into the best damn art and literature program we can find. Before I knew it, I was enrolled in the literature department of a nearby college. Grandma had made sure the campus was fully accessible, and even hired a part-time assistant to help me with any physical tasks I couldn't manage. That first day of college, I was terrified. I kept waiting for the stares, the whispers, the pitying looks I'd grown so accustomed to. But they never came. Sure, people noticed my wheelchair, but it was with curiosity rather than judgment. And once they got to know me, the real me, not the shadow I'd been for so long, the wheelchair became just another part of who I was, not my defining feature. I threw myself into my studies with a passion I never knew I had. Literature opened up whole new worlds to me, and my professors encouraged me to explore my own voice through poetry. My art classes taught me new techniques, ways to express on paper the thoughts and feelings I'd kept bottled up for so long. And you know what? Turns out, I wasn't half bad at this stuff. My poems started winning competitions, my artwork was featured in student exhibitions. For the first time in my life, I was being seen for my abilities, not my disabilities. It wasn't all smooth sailing, of course. There were days when the pain, both physical and emotional, felt overwhelming. Days when I missed my parents and sister, despite everything. But I had Grandma, and I had my art, and slowly but surely, I was building a life for myself. Now, here I am, holding my very first published book of poetry in my hands. It's a slim volume, nothing fancy, but it's mine. Every word, every illustration, they all came from me. From my experiences, my pain, my joy, my growth. As I flip through the pages, I can't help but smile at the dedication. To Grandma, who taught me that being different isn't a flaw, it's a feature. And to everyone who's ever felt invisible, may you find the strength to make yourself seen. My name's Sarah, and I've got a story to tell you. It all started when I was just a little kid, maybe 5 or 6. That's when my parents split up. Dad, his name's Mark, he couldn't take it anymore. Mom, Linda, she'd been riding his ass for years about not making enough money. Always putting him down, making him feel like shit. I remember this one time, Dad came home excited about a promotion at work. He was grinning from ear to ear, proud of himself for once. Mom just looked at him and said, "That's it? I thought you'd finally gotten a real job." The light just went out of his eyes. It was like watching someone deflate. So yeah, Dad left. Can't say I blame him now, looking back. But at the time, it felt like my whole world was falling apart. Mom, though? She saw an opportunity. Mom figured out pretty quick that being a poor, abandoned single mother could get her a lot of perks. At work, she'd lay it on thick with her boss. "I'm so sorry I'm late again, Mr. Johnson," she'd sniffle. Sarah was sick, and with no one to help. Mr. Johnson would pat her hand and tell her not to worry. Meanwhile, I was perfectly fine, spending the morning watching cartoons while Mom did her hair and makeup. Family gatherings were the worst. Mom would hold court, dramatically recounting how Dad had left us with nothing. I'd squirm in my seat, uncomfortable with the lie, but not daring to speak up. Even at that age, I knew better than to contradict Mom in public. What no one knew was that Dad was sending money every month. Child support, he called it. Mom would scoff when the checks came in. "Look at this, Sarah," she'd say, waving the paper in my face. "Your father thinks this pittance is enough to raise a child on. Pathetic." I didn't know how much it was supposed to be. All I knew was that it made Mom angry, and when Mom was angry, life got harder for me. As the years went by, I started noticing things. Like how Mom would look at me sometimes, her eyes narrowing like she was seeing something she didn't like. Later, I realized it was because I looked too much like Dad. It brought back memories for her, and not the good kind. But she kept me around. I was useful, you see. The picture of the struggling single mom and her brave little girl was too good to pass up. It got her sympathy, special treatment, even some government assistance. Then, when I was about 10, everything changed again. Mom met Richard. Rich, successful Richard. Suddenly, being a struggling single mom wasn't so appealing anymore. No, now she had a new image to cultivate. The devoted wife of a prominent businessman. And I didn't fit into that picture so well. It started small at first. Mom would forget to wash my clothes, leaving me with nothing clean to wear to school. I'd show up in wrinkled, stained outfits, my face burning with shame as the other kids whispered and pointed. Then came the food situation. Mom would cook these elaborate meals for her and Richard, filling the house with mouth-watering smells. But when I'd come to the table, she'd frown. "Oh, Sarah, I'm sorry. I didn't make enough for 3. Why don't you make yourself a sandwich?" I'd retreat to the kitchen, my stomach growling as I slapped together a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Through the door, I could hear Mom and Richard laughing, the clink of wine glasses a stark contrast to my meager meal. The worst was when she started messing with my schoolwork. I'd spend hours on an assignment, only to have it disappear the next morning. I'd show up to class empty-handed, stammering excuses to my teacher. My grades started to slip, and the teachers began giving me concerned looks. Through it all, Richard remained oblivious. He was always buried in his work, and when he wasn't, his attention was solely on Mom. She'd simper and coo at him, playing the part of the adoring wife. "Richard, darling, you work so hard," she'd say, massaging his shoulders. "You deserve to relax." He'd smile up at her, completely under her spell. "What would I do without you, Linda?" Things got even worse when Mom announced she was pregnant. Richard was over the moon, and Mom milked it for all it was worth. "The doctor says I need plenty of rest," she'd tell me, lounging on the couch. "Be a dear and tidy up the house, won't you?" I'd spend my afternoons cleaning while Mom napped or chatted with her friends on the phone. When Richard came home, she'd struggle to her feet, one hand on her barely there bump. "Oh, honey, I'm so tired," she'd sigh. "Growing a baby is hard work." Richard would rush to her side, all concern. "Sit down, my love. Sarah, bring your mother some water." As the months wore on, I felt more and more isolated. At school, I withdrew from my friends, too embarrassed to invite them over. At home, I was little more than a servant, expected to cater to Mom's every whim. One night, as I lay in bed listening to Mom and Richard cooing over nursery designs, something in me snapped. I couldn't do this anymore. I needed out. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and did something I'd never dared to do before. I called my dad and told him everything. The neglect, the mind games, the constant feeling of being unwanted. Dad listened in silence, only the sound of his breathing telling me he was still there. When I finally ran out of words, there was a long pause. "Pack your bags," he said at last, his voice hard. "I'm coming to get you." The next morning, I woke up early, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. I had already packed my bags the night before, unable to sleep from anticipation. As I dragged my suitcase down the stairs, I heard Mom's voice from the kitchen. "Going somewhere, Sarah?" I froze, expecting a confrontation. But when I turned, I saw Mom leaning against the doorframe, a strange smile on her face. She looked relieved. "I'm going to live with Dad," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. To my shock, Mom's smile widened. "Well, it's about time," she said, her tone almost cheerful. "Richard and I could use the extra space for the baby." Her words hit me like a slap, but before I could respond, I heard a car horn outside. Dad was here. Mom walked me to the door, that unsettling smile still in place. "Have a good life, Sarah," she said, practically shooing me out. As I walked to Dad's car, I glanced back. Mom stood in the doorway, looking frankly joyful as she waved goodbye. It was the happiest I'd seen her in years, and it was because I was leaving. Dad's apartment was small, but it felt more like home than anywhere I'd lived in years. However, we wouldn't be there for long. Over the next few months, I watched in awe as Dad's business took off like a rocket. It seemed like every week brought news of a new contract, a big client, or an expansion. Within a year, we were house hunting in the city's most exclusive neighborhoods. The house we ended up buying was nothing short of spectacular. 3 stories of modern architecture, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a backyard that looked like something out of a magazine. My room was bigger than our entire old apartment. While Dad worked long hours managing his now booming business, I threw myself into making our big house a home. I learned to cook gourmet meals, filling the place with amazing smells. I kept things tidy, managed the household staff, even started a vegetable garden in our spacious backyard. As the months passed, I watched Dad's hard work continue to pay off. His business kept growing, and with it, our lifestyle improved even more. I transferred to the most prestigious private school in the city. On my 16th birthday, Dad surprised me with a car. Not just any car, but a brand new luxury SUV. "Now you can drive yourself to school in style," he said, tossing me the keys. "And maybe run some errands for your old man?" As I settled into my new life, I thought about Mom less and less. She never tried to contact me, and I made no effort to reach out to her or any of my maternal relatives. The wounds were still too raw, the memories too painful. Instead, I focused on my studies. Years passed, and before I knew it, I was graduating college with honors. As I stood on that stage, accepting my diploma, I searched the crowd for Dad's face. He was there, beaming with pride, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. This was what it felt like to be loved, truly and unconditionally. After the ceremony, Dad pulled me aside. "I've got something for you," he said, his eyes twinkling with excitement. He handed me a small box. Inside was a key. "It's for your new apartment in the city center. Consider it a graduation gift." Tears welled up in my eyes as I hugged him fiercely. "Thank you, Dad, for everything." It had been a few years since I graduated from college. My career was taking off, I had a beautiful apartment in the city, and life was good. Dad and I had settled into a comfortable routine of weekly dinners and long phone calls. Everything was perfect. Until it wasn't. The news came like a thunderbolt out of a clear sky. Dad was sick. Cancer. Advanced. The doctor's words blurred together in a haze of medical jargon, but the gist was clear: it was bad. From that moment on, my world narrowed to a singular focus: saving Dad. I took a leave of absence from work, moving back into his house to take care of him. Every waking moment was devoted to his care. I researched treatments, consulted specialists, tried alternative therapies. Anything that might give us a fighting chance. The months that followed were a brutal cycle of hope and despair. For every good day, when Dad felt strong enough to sit in the garden or share a meal, there were 3 bad ones filled with pain and nausea from the treatments. One evening, as I was helping him back to bed after a particularly rough day, he turned to me with a serious look. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need you to promise me something." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Promise me you'll live your life. Really live it. Don't let this hold you back." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was going to be fine, but we both knew better. So instead, I squeezed his hand and said, "I promise, Dad." He died 2 weeks later. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, telling him how much I loved him, how grateful I was for everything he'd done for me. The next few days passed in a blur. I felt numb, going through the motions of arranging the funeral. There were so many details to handle: the casket, the flowers, the obituary. It all felt surreal, like I was planning an event for someone else. I was at the funeral home, trying to decide on music for the service, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello? Sarah? It's your mother." I nearly dropped the phone. After all these years of silence, she was calling now? "What do you want?" I asked, my voice cold. "I heard about Mark," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. "I'm so sorry, sweetie. I'd like to help. With the funeral arrangements, I mean." I wanted to hang up. To tell her to go to hell. But I was so tired, so overwhelmed. And a tiny part of me, a part one thought I'd buried long ago, yearned for a mother's comfort. "Okay," I heard myself say. "You can help." As I ended the call, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just opened a door I should have kept firmly shut. But with Dad gone, Mom was the only family I had left. Mom arrived at the funeral home an hour after our call, with my half-brother Thomas in tow. The kid was about 13 now, gangly and awkward. I watched as Mom fussed over him, straightening his tie, smoothing his hair. It was like a knife to the gut, seeing her shower Thomas with the affection I'd been denied my entire childhood. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Despite my reservations, I put her to work. To my surprise, Mom turned out to be surprisingly helpful, managing the catering, arranging the flowers, dealing with the endless parade of well-wishers. The funeral itself was a blur. I remember standing there, numb, as people I barely knew came up to offer condolences. Linda stayed close, her hand occasionally touching my arm in what I suppose was meant to be a comforting gesture. It felt strange, this sudden maternal presence after years of neglect. After the service, as people were filing out of the cemetery, Linda approached me again. "Sarah, I know this might not be the best time, but I'd like to stay in touch. Maybe we could get coffee sometime?" I stared at her, this woman who had made my childhood a living hell, who had been thrilled to see me leave. But she was also the only family I had left. "Maybe," I said finally. "I'll think about it." To my surprise, Linda kept her word. In the weeks that followed, she called regularly, her voice always tinged with concern. "How are you holding up, sweetie?" she'd ask. "Is there anything you need?" At first, I was guarded, giving short, non-committal answers. But as the days wore on and the reality of Dad's absence set in, I found myself craving any kind of connection. Even if it was with Linda. Our conversation started simple enough. She'd ask about my job, my apartment, my friends. But gradually, her questions began to shift. "Your father's business," she'd say casually. "I hope it's not causing you too much stress. Mark always worked so hard." I'd deflect, changing the subject. The truth was, I was still trying to wrap my head around everything Dad had left me. The company, the real estate portfolio, it was overwhelming. And something in me, some instinct honed by years of Linda's manipulations, told me to keep quiet about it. As weeks turned into months, Linda's hints became less subtle. "Thomas is looking at colleges," she mentioned during one call. "The tuition these days, it's just astronomical. I don't know how we're going to manage it." I made a non-committal noise, my guard instantly up. Another time, it was, "Richard's had some setbacks at work. The economy, you know. It's hitting everyone hard." Each conversation seemed to circle back to money, to the struggles they were facing. And each time, I could feel the unspoken expectation hanging in the air. Despite my initial reservations, Linda's persistent displays of maternal affection began to wear down my defenses. Against my better judgment, I started providing small amounts of financial assistance. It started innocently enough, helping Thomas with his SAT prep courses, buying Linda a new laptop when hers broke down, even covering a month's rent when Richard's company went through a rough patch. "You're an angel, Sarah," Linda would gush. "I don't know what we'd do without you." Each time, I felt a warmth in my chest. Was this what it felt like to have a real family? Meanwhile, I threw myself into running Dad's company. I made his longtime deputy the director, staying on as the owner and reserving the right to make all important decisions. It was challenging work, but I felt closer to Dad every time I sat in his old office. As the months passed, Linda's requests grew more frequent and more substantial. What started as occasional help turned into regular expectations. The breaking point came on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. I was knee-deep in quarterly reports when Linda called. "Sarah, darling," she began, her voice dripping with sweetness. "We've been thinking. It's been so long since we had a proper family vacation. We found this amazing package deal for a European tour." I felt my stomach drop. "Linda, I don't know." "It would mean so much to Thomas," she interrupted. "And after all we've been through, don't you think we deserve a little happiness?" Guilt warred with resentment in my chest. Before I knew it, I'd agreed to fund their trip. But it didn't stop there. The day after they returned, Linda was on the phone again. "Now, about Thomas's college fund," she said, her tone no longer sweet but demanding. "We'll need you to set that up right away. He's got his heart set on Princeton, you know." Something in me snapped. All the years of neglect, the emotional abuse, the manipulation, it all came rushing back. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "No more, Mom. I'm done." There was a pause, then Linda's voice came back, cold and hard. "After everything we've done for you? You ungrateful little scum. How dare you turn your back on your family?" I laughed, a bitter sound. "Family? You mean the mother who was thrilled to see me leave? The one who made my childhood a living hell?" The argument escalated quickly. Linda dropped all pretense of affection, hurling accusations and insults. I gave as good as I got, years of pent-up anger and hurt pouring out. "You're just like your father," she spat. "Selfish and cold-hearted." "Thank God for that," I shot back. "At least he loved me." The line went dead. I stood there, shaking, my phone clutched in my hand. The silence that followed was deafening. When the opportunity for a month-long business trip abroad came up, I jumped at it. A chance to get away, to clear my head. As I boarded the plane, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. Maybe this was what I needed, some time and distance to figure things out. After a month away, I was looking forward to the comfort of my own bed. The business trip had been successful but exhausting, and all I wanted was to kick off my shoes and relax in my apartment. But as I turned the key in the lock, something felt off. The door swung open to reveal a completely different apartment. Gone were my carefully chosen furnishings, replaced by unfamiliar decor. A startled couple stared at me from the couch. "Who are you?" I demanded, my heart racing. "What are you doing in my apartment?" The man stood up, looking confused. "Your apartment? We bought this place a couple of weeks ago. From a woman named Linda, I think?" The world tilted on its axis. "Linda, my mother. No, it couldn't be." "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice shaking. "I never sold this apartment. I've been out of the country." The couple exchanged worried glances. "We have all the paperwork," the woman said hesitantly. "Maybe you should talk to your realtor?" I stumbled out of the apartment, my mind reeling. My first instinct was to call the police, report a fraud. But a nagging voice in my head told me to confront Mom first. I needed to hear it from her. With trembling fingers, I dialed her number. It rang once, twice. "Hello, Sarah," Mom's voice was sickeningly sweet. "How was your trip?" "Cut the crap, Mom," I snarled. "What did you do to my apartment?" There was a pause, then to my shock, Linda laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "If you had just shared your wealth willingly, it wouldn't have come to this. You brought this on yourself, you know." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. You sold my apartment? How could you?" "I'll go to the police, You'll what?" Linda interrupted, her tone suddenly sharp. "Report your own mother to the authorities? Please. We both know you don't have the spine for that." The call ended, leaving me standing on the sidewalk, homeless and in shock. But Linda's smug certainty had ignited a fire in me. Without thinking, I hailed a cab and gave the driver Linda and Richard's address. I pounded on the door, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Richard answered, his face a mask of confusion. "Sarah, what's going on?" I pushed past him into the house. "Where's Linda?" I demanded. "She's out," Richard said, still looking bewildered. "Sarah, what's this about?" In a rush, I told him everything, the apartment, Linda's confession, all of it. As I spoke, I watched the color drain from Richard's face. "But, that's impossible," he stammered. "We don't need money for Thomas's education. I've already set aside funds for that." We stared at each other, the truth dawning on us both. With shaking hands, Richard began pulling out financial statements, credit card bills. As we pored over them, a horrifying picture emerged. Mom secretly took out loans, and now she is mired in debt. "I had no idea," Richard whispered, looking shell-shocked. All this time, I felt a strange mix of vindication and pity. Richard had been just as deceived as I had been. As the full extent of Linda's deception became clear, I felt a cold resolve settle over me. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was fraud, plain and simple. I didn't hesitate. The moment I hung up with the 911 operator, a weight lifted off my shoulders. For too long, I'd been Mom's victim. Not anymore. The investigation that followed was brutal but necessary. Every rock overturned revealed more of Linda's deceptions. She hadn't just forged my signature to sell my apartment, she'd been living a complete double life. Credit card statements revealed extravagant purchases, designer clothes, luxury spa treatments, 5-star hotels. All hidden from Richard, all financed through a web of lies and secret loans. The trial became a media circus. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, hungry for every sordid detail. I hated the attention, but part of me savored seeing Linda's carefully crafted image crumble in the public eye. In the end, justice prevailed. Mom was found guilty on all counts: fraud, forgery, the works. The judge's words still ring in my ears. Mrs. Linda Harrison, your actions show a blatant disregard for the law and a shocking betrayal of your family's trust. I sentence you to 3 years in prison, with an order to repay the full value of the fraudulently sold apartment to Sarah Harrison. Richard, bless him, was shell-shocked throughout the whole ordeal. The day after the sentencing, he called me. Sarah, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I'm filing for divorce. And I'm seeking full custody of Thomas. After what she's done, I can't let her near him. In the aftermath, I found myself rebuilding my life once again. The apartment money was returned, and I bought a small house on the outskirts of the city. A fresh start. I threw myself into running Dad's company, honoring his legacy the best way I knew how. The work was challenging, but rewarding. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly standing on my own 2 feet. Thomas and I keep in touch. He's in college now, studying engineering with Richard's support. It's bittersweet, but I'm glad we have a chance at some kind of relationship. As for Linda, I haven't heard from her since the trial. I don't know if she's tried to reach out, and honestly, I don't want to know. That chapter of my life is closed. I never knew how close I came to not existing. Mom told me years later that when she found out she was pregnant with me, she wasn't sure they could afford a kid. Dad wasn't making much, and they were barely scraping by. But then my dad's parents, my grandparents, found out about the pregnancy. Not only were they thrilled, but they went above and beyond. They gave Mom and Dad their house, a nice place in a good neighborhood, close to a great school. They even promised to help out with money. I was born into that house, and for the first few years, life was pretty good. Grandma and Grandpa were always around, picking me up, taking care of me when Mom was working. They'd take me to the park, read me stories, and sneak me treats when Mom wasn't looking. When I started school at 5, they'd pick me up every day. We'd go for ice cream or to the playground. Those were some of the happiest times of my life. But then, everything changed. I remember that night clearly. I was supposed to be asleep, but the yelling woke me up. Mom and Dad were having a huge fight. I couldn't make out everything they were saying, but I heard words like betrayal and how could you? Then I heard the front door slam. I peeked out my window and saw Dad stumbling to his car. He was holding a bottle. I later learned it was whiskey. I watched him drive off, tires screeching. That was the last time I saw my dad alive. The next morning, 2 police officers came to our door. Mom collapsed when they told her dad had been in an accident. He'd lost control of the car and driven off the road. He didn't make it. The funeral was a blur. I remember holding Mom's hand, confused about why Dad was in a box and why everyone was crying. Grandma and Grandpa were there, hugging me tightly, their faces streaked with tears. But after the funeral, things changed rapidly. Mom seemed to bounce back quickly, too quickly. Within months, she had a new man in her life. Before I knew it, they were married, and Mom was pregnant again. "You're going to have a little sister, Carol," Mom told me, her eyes shining. "Isn't that exciting?" I nodded, not sure how to feel. Everything was changing so fast, and I missed Dad. I missed Grandma and Grandpa too. They stopped coming around, and I didn't understand why. "Mom, why don't Grandma and Grandpa visit anymore?" I asked one day. Mom's face hardened. "They don't want anything to do with us anymore, Carol. They abandoned us because I've started a new family." Then her face softened. "At least they left us the house and helped with the money for your education. That's something to be thankful for." My little sister arrived a few months after Mom remarried. I remember Mom saying she was born prematurely, but even at my young age, something felt off about that explanation. Still, I was too preoccupied with the sudden changes in my life to question it much. My new stepfather, Frank, worked as a driver. Mom kept her job as a salesperson. We weren't rich by any means, but we always had enough for the essentials. At least, that's what I was told. From the start, it was clear that Frank didn't like me much. He'd glare at me across the dinner table, his jaw clenching whenever I spoke. "Can't you keep that kid quiet?" he'd snap at Mom. "I'm trying to eat in peace here." Mom would rush to placate him. "Carol, honey, why don't you go to your room? I'll bring you your dinner later." As time went on, these moments became more frequent. Frank's temper was short, and everything seemed to set him off, especially me. He'd call me names when Mom wasn't around, his face twisted in disgust. "You're nothing but a freeloader," he'd spit. "A burden. You know that, right?" I'd nod silently, fighting back tears. What else could I do? The contrast between how Frank treated me and my sister was stark. With her, he was all smiles and affection. He'd bounce her on his knee, shower her with gifts, and speak to her in a sickeningly sweet voice that made my stomach turn. "There's my little angel," he'd coo. "Daddy's got a surprise for you." Mom, desperate to keep Frank happy, started finding ways to keep me out of sight. She'd usher me to my room whenever Frank came home, locking the door behind me. I'd sit there for hours, listening to the sounds of a happy family on the other side, laughter, conversation, the clink of cutlery on plates. I didn't understand why I had to eat alone in my room, why I couldn't move freely in my own home, why I was treated like an unwelcome guest. As I grew older, the isolation intensified. Family holidays? I wasn't invited. Trips to visit Frank's friends and relatives? I was left behind. Even when people came to our house, I was told to stay in my room and keep quiet. "We don't want to upset Frank," Mom would say, her eyes pleading. "You know how he gets." And I did know. I'd seen his rages, heard the crashes and bangs when something set him off. So I stayed quiet. I stayed out of the way. I became a ghost in my own home. The only times I felt any semblance of normalcy were the rare occasions when Mom would take me shopping or run errands with her. But even then, there was no room for fun or freedom. It was all business, quick and efficient, always with an eye on the clock. "We can't be too long," Mom would say, checking her watch nervously. "Frank will be home soon." As the years passed, I retreated further into myself. I became shy, withdrawn. At school, I barely spoke to anyone. But in the privacy of my room, in the worlds I created in my mind, I found an escape. I'd make up stories, grand adventures where I was the hero, where I was wanted and loved. When I turned 16, my life took an unexpected turn. Spending most of my time alone in my room, I'd become pretty good at using the internet to escape my reality. One day, I stumbled upon an online publishing house that was looking for fresh voices in children's and young adult literature. On a whim, I submitted some of my stories. To my shock, they loved them. Before I knew it, I was working with them regularly, writing stories and helping develop educational apps for kids and teens. For the first time in years, I felt proud of myself. My ideas were popular, my stories were being published, and best of all, I was earning my own money. I saved every penny I could, watching my bank account grow with a sense of excitement I'd never felt before. One day, feeling particularly bold after a big payment came through, I decided to share my success with Mom. We were alone in the kitchen, Frank was out on a long-haul drive, and my sister was at a friend's house. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking a little, "I've got something to tell you. I've been working for this publishing house, writing stories and stuff. And, well, I'm making pretty good money." Mom's eyes widened. Really? Oh, Carol, that's wonderful. I always knew you were a smart girl. Her praise, so rare these days, made me glow. But then her expression changed, becoming calculating. You know, she said, leaning in close, this is perfect timing. We've been having some financial troubles lately. My heart sank. I should have known better than to hope for simple pride or happiness. The thing is, Mom continued, this house is so big, and the upkeep is expensive. And well, raising you hasn't been cheap either. We've been exhausted trying to provide for you all these years. I felt like I'd been slapped. Hadn't I been the one locked away, barely even part of the family? How had I been such a burden? Remember that college fund we set aside for you? Mom said, not meeting my eyes. Well, we had to use that money. For the house, you know. But now that you're earning your own money, you can support yourself, right? I nodded numbly, not trusting myself to speak. That's my girl, Mom said, patting my hand. Oh, and one more thing. Frank and I have been talking, and we think it's best if you move out after you graduate. We're planning to renovate your room for your sister. She needs more space, you understand. I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. Move out? But, where will I go? Mom shrugged, already turning away. You're a smart girl, Carol. I'm sure you'll figure it out. You've got some savings now, right? As she walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone, the full weight of her words hit me. I was being kicked out. The money I thought would be my ticket to college was gone. And my own mother didn't seem to care where I ended up. The months leading up to graduation were a blur of anxiety and desperate planning. I threw myself into my schoolwork during the day, determined to at least finish high school strong. At night, I worked tirelessly on my writing projects, trying to save every penny I could. But no matter how I crunched the numbers, it wasn't enough. College tuition, living expenses, books, it all added up to way more than I had or could hope to earn in time. The realization that my dreams of higher education were slipping away hit me hard. I tried to talk to Mom about it once, hoping against hope that she'd have a change of heart. Mom, I've been looking at college costs, and I don't think I can. She cut me off before I could finish. Carol, we've been over this. You're on your own now. You'll figure it out. The day of graduation came and went. I should have felt proud, accomplished. Instead, I felt numb. The next morning, Mom appeared in my doorway with a couple of cardboard boxes. Time to pack up, Carol, she said, her tone eerily cheerful. Your sister's so excited about her new room. I packed my life into those boxes, fighting back tears. When I was done, Mom helped me carry them to the front door. As I stood on the porch, my meager possessions at my feet, Mom gave me a quick, awkward hug. Good luck out there, she said, and then the door closed behind her. I stood there for a moment, shell-shocked. Then, taking a deep breath, I picked up my boxes and walked away from the only home I'd ever known. With what little money I had, I managed to rent a tiny studio apartment. It was in a sketchy part of town, and the sound of sirens often kept me up at night, but it was mine. I decided to postpone college for a year. I had no choice, really, and focus on work. I reached out to my contacts at the publishing house, practically begging for more work. To my relief, they were more than happy to oblige. We've been impressed with your work, Carol, my editor told me. How would you feel about writing some children's books for us? I jumped at the opportunity. Soon, I was working around the clock, churning out stories and illustrations. The work was demanding, but I loved it. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was good at something, like I had a purpose. Living alone wasn't easy, but I was used to fending for myself. I learned to budget, to cook simple meals, to navigate the public transit system. I even made a few friends in the building, other young people trying to make it on their own. But despite my best efforts, saving for college remained a distant dream. Every time I thought I was getting ahead, some new expense would crop up. A plumbing emergency in my apartment, a laptop repair, a trip to the doctor when I caught a nasty flu, each setback ate into my savings. It had been a year since I'd left home when my phone rang with a number I never expected to see again. My mother's voice came through, sickly sweet and unfamiliar. "Carol, sweetie, how are you? I've missed you so much. Why don't you come visit us this weekend?" Suspicion immediately flared in my gut, but curiosity got the better of me. I agreed to visit, packing an overnight bag with a mix of anticipation and dread. As soon as I arrived at my old home, my suspicions were confirmed. Mom was overly affectionate, hugging me tightly and peppering me with questions about my life. It felt artificial, like watching a bad actress perform. "Oh, Carol," she cooed, "you must be tired from your trip. Why don't you sleep in your sister's room tonight? She can take the guest room." I nodded, bemused. My sister, now a teenager, rolled her eyes but didn't argue. The next morning, I woke to the sound of familiar voices downstairs. Curious, I made my way to the kitchen, where I froze in the doorway. Sitting at the table were two elderly people I hadn't seen in years, but recognized instantly, my grandparents, my dad's parents. Grandma's eyes lit up when she saw me. "Carol, oh, look how you've grown." I stood there, shocked, as they explained why they were there. "We're moving to a nursing home soon," Grandpa said, his voice gruff with emotion. "But before we go, we wanted to make sure you're doing well. That you're prospering." "Yes," Grandma chimed in, "tell us all about your college. What are you studying, dear?" I opened my mouth, not sure what to say, when Mom jumped in. "Oh, Carol's doing wonderfully at school. Aren't you, honey? Top of her class, just like always." I stared at her, unable to believe the lies flowing so easily from her lips. My grandparents looked pleased, but they still had questions. "That's wonderful," Grandma said. "Could we talk to Carol alone for a bit? We'd love to catch up." A flash of panic crossed Mom's face. "Oh, I don't think that's necessary. Carol's quite busy, aren't you, dear? In fact, we should probably wrap this up soon." She quickly steered the conversation to other topics, barely letting me get a word in. As the visit came to an end, I felt a gentle touch on my arm. Grandma pressed something into my hand, a business card. As soon as my grandparents left, the change in Mom was immediate. Her smile vanished, replaced by a cold, indifferent expression I knew all too well. "Well, that's done," she said, clearing the table briskly. "You should probably head home now, Carol, I'm sure you have things to do." I stood there, the business card burning a hole in my pocket, as Mom all but pushed me out the door. The warmth and affection of moments ago were gone, replaced by the cool detachment I'd grown up with. As soon as I got back to my tiny apartment, I pulled out the business card my grandmother had slipped me. With trembling fingers, I dialed the number, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello?" My grandmother's voice came through, warm and familiar, despite the years. "Grandma, it's Carol," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We talked for a while, her voice filled with a mixture of joy and concern. Before I knew it, we'd arranged for her and Grandpa to visit me the next day. I gave them my apartment address, feeling a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. As soon as I hung up, I threw myself into a cleaning frenzy. My small studio apartment wasn't much, but I was determined to make it as welcoming as possible. I scrubbed every surface, organized my meager belongings, and even managed to find a vase for some fresh flowers I picked up from the corner store. That night, I barely slept. Instead, I spent hours in the tiny kitchenette, preparing lunch for tomorrow. I even decided to bake Grandma's favorite cookies, snickerdoodles, using a recipe I'd found online. Morning came too quickly. I was just pulling the last batch of cookies from the oven when there was a knock at the door. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed down my shirt and went to answer it. There they stood, Grandma and Grandpa. For a moment, we all just stared at each other, years of separation hanging between us. Then Grandma stepped forward, enveloping me in a tight hug. "Oh, Carol," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Look at you, all grown up." As I ushered them inside, I saw their eyes widen as they took in my small apartment. Confusion flickered across their faces. "Carol," Grandpa said slowly, "why are you living here? Your mother told us you were living in the house." Before I could even begin to explain, they launched into a story that turned my world upside down. "We've always wanted to be part of your life," Grandma said, her eyes brimming with tears. "But your mother, she kept us away." They told me about the night my father died, the real story. My mother had been unfaithful. She was already pregnant with my sister when my father found out. He wanted a divorce, but then the accident happened. I sat there, stunned, as they continued. "The house I grew up in, the one Mom and Frank still lived in, was mine. Left to me in my father's will. We've been sending money for your care every month," Grandma said, reaching for my hand. "After you graduated, we increased the amount, thinking you were in college and needed more." The room seemed to spin. All this time, struggling to make ends meet, and there had been money meant for me? A house in my name? "We wanted to make sure you were living comfortably in the house, that everything was okay," Grandpa added. "That's why we came to visit yesterday." As I sat there, staring at my grandparents in disbelief, the weight of their words slowly sank in. I felt a surge of emotions, anger, betrayal, and a deep, aching sadness for the childhood I never had. "I don't understand," I stammered. "All this time, there was money for me? A house in my name?" Grandma squeezed my hand tightly. "Tell us everything, Carol. We need to know what really happened." And so, I did. I told them about my lonely childhood, confined to my room like a dirty secret. I spoke of Frank's hostility, of always feeling like a burden. I explained how the money for college had been taken away, how I'd been kicked out with nothing but a few boxes of belongings. "I've been working nonstop," I said, my voice cracking. "Writing children's books, living in this tiny apartment, trying to save for college. I never knew about any maintenance money." As I spoke, I watched my grandparents' expressions change from shock to fury. Grandpa's face turned red, his hands clenching into fists. "This is unacceptable," he growled. "What your mother has done, it's theft, it's abuse. We're going to make this right, Carol. I promise you that." True to their word, my grandparents sprang into action. They hired a lawyer, one of the best in the city. Over the next few weeks, I watched in awe as they fought tirelessly on my behalf. The court case was brutal. Mom and Frank tried to paint me as a rebellious, ungrateful child who had run away. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements showed years of diverted funds. Neighbors testified about my isolation. In the end, justice prevailed. The judge ruled in our favor, evicting Mom and Frank from the house that was rightfully mine. The back payments of maintenance money were ordered to be paid to me in full. As we left the courthouse, I felt a mix of vindication and sadness. Yes, I had won, but at what cost? The family I had known, dysfunctional as it was gone forever. But I had a new family now. Grandma and Grandpa were determined to make up for lost time. They helped me move into my house, a concept I was still struggling to grasp. They gave me money for tuition and sat with me for hours, helping me choose the right college. I decided on a school close to the nursing home where they were moving. It felt right, being near them after all these years apart. For a while, everything seemed perfect. I visited Grandma and Grandpa often, soaking up their love and wisdom. We'd play cards, watch old movies, and talk for hours. They told me stories about my dad, filling in the blanks of my own history. But life, I was learning, had a cruel way of giving with one hand and taking with the other. Just as I was settling into my new life, reveling in the love of my grandparents, tragedy struck. Grandpa went first. A heart attack, quick and unexpected. Grandma followed barely 2 months later. The doctors said it was natural causes, but I knew the truth, she'd lost her will to live without him. Once again, I found myself alone. The grief was overwhelming. I'd only just found them, only just started to heal the wounds of my past, and now they were gone. I threw myself into my studies, trying to distract myself from the pain. But every empty holiday, every milestone I couldn't share with them, was a fresh wound. Years passed, and life took on a rhythm I never thought possible. I graduated college with honors, landing a job at a prestigious publishing house, the same one that had given me my first break as a teenager. With the inheritance from my grandparents, I bought a cozy apartment close to work, a place that was truly mine. My financial situation had dramatically improved. I rented out my grandparents' house and my childhood home, providing a steady stream of additional income. For the first time in my life, I felt secure, stable, and most importantly, happy. I had friends, a fulfilling career, and a sense of peace I'd never known before. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. One sunny afternoon, my phone rang. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I recognized it instantly, my mother's. With a mix of curiosity and dread, I answered. "Carol?" Her voice was sickly sweet, dripping with false affection. "Sweetie, how are you?" Before I could respond, she launched into a sob story. My sister was pregnant, abandoned by her husband. They were all living together, Mom, Frank, and my sister, crammed into a tiny rented apartment. "We have nowhere to go," Mom whimpered. "I was hoping, well, that house you own, your childhood home. Could we maybe stay there? Just until we get back on our feet." I listened in stunned silence as she alternated between begging and crying, her voice taking on that manipulative tone I remembered all too well from my childhood. "Please, Carol," she pleaded. "We're family. We need your help." As she spoke, memories flooded back. The lonely nights locked in my room. The years of neglect and emotional abuse. The day she kicked me out with nothing but a few boxes of belongings. "Family?" I finally spoke, my voice cold. "That's rich coming from you, Mom. Where was this family when you locked me away like a dirty secret? Where was it when you kicked me out with nowhere to go?" "Carol, that's all in the past." "No," I cut her off. "It's not in the past. It's right here, right now. You're only reaching out because you need something from me. Just like always." I could almost hear her scrambling, trying to find the right words to manipulate me. But I wasn't that scared, lonely girl anymore. "You want my advice, Mom? Solve your own problems. Figure it out on your own. Isn't that what you told me when you threw me out?" "But Carol..." "Good luck," I said, echoing her words from years ago. "You're going to need it." Without waiting for a response, I hung up. My hand shook as I blocked her number, but I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For years, I'd carried the burden of her rejection, her neglect. But now, I was finally free.
My name's Michelle, and it all started when I was just a kid, 8 years old. My parents split up, and suddenly, I was living with my grandparents. Dad moved to another state, called a few times, then poof, vanished completely after a couple of years. Mom married some loaded businessman and jetted off to Europe. I remember the day Mom left. She hugged me tight, tears in her eyes. "I'll visit, baby. I promise," she said. I believed her. Kids are stupid like that sometimes. For a while, she kept her word. She'd sweep in once a year, always on my birthday. No husband, no new baby.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention, Mom had another kid. A sister I'd never met. But Mom would show up, arms loaded with gifts, smelling of expensive perfume and full of stories about her fabulous new life. Life went on. I went to school, made some friends, tried to be normal. But there was always this hole, you know? This empty space where my parents should have been. Grandpa and Grandma did their best to fill it. Grandpa would take me fishing on weekends, teach me how to bait a hook and cast a line. Grandma was always in the kitchen, cooking up a storm. She'd let me help, teaching me her secret recipes. But when I turned 13, Grandpa got sick. Cancer, the doctors said. It was quick, brutal. One minute he was there, telling his corny jokes and showing me how to fix a leaky faucet. The next, he was gone. The funeral was small. Just me, Grandma, and a handful of neighbors. Mom couldn't make it. "Business emergency," she said over the phone. I wanted to scream at her, tell her that her own father was dead, for crying out loud. But I didn't. I just said, "Okay, Mom, I understand." When I turned 16, Mom's yearly visits suddenly stopped. No explanation, no apology, just radio silence. Our relationship dwindled down to occasional phone calls, usually initiated by me. Meanwhile, I threw myself into my studies. Graduated high school with decent grades, nothing spectacular but enough to get me into a local college. Those years flew by in a blur of classes, part-time jobs, and hanging out with friends. Before I knew it, I was tossing my cap in the air at graduation. After college, I landed a job at a local marketing firm. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me a sense of purpose. Life was okay. Not great, not terrible, just okay. I had my routine, my friends, my cozy little world in Grandma's house. But life, that sneaky bastard, had other plans. It started with Grandma forgetting things. Small stuff at first, where she put her glasses, what day it was. I brushed it off as old age. But then it got worse. She'd forget to turn off the stove, wander out of the house in her nightgown. The diagnosis came like a punch to the gut, Alzheimer's. I tried my best to take care of her, but it was hard. Watching the woman who raised me, who was my rock, slowly slip away, it was hell. The day she died, I was holding her hand. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in months. "Michelle," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I love you, sweetheart." And then she was gone. I called Mom, choking back tears. "Mom, Grandma's, she's gone." There was a long pause on the other end. "Oh, Michelle," she finally said, her voice oddly flat. "I'm so sorry. I can't get away right now. Work is just crazy. You understand, don't you?" So I planned the funeral alone. Picked out the casket, arranged the flowers, wrote the eulogy. The service was small, just like Grandpa's. As I watched them lower the casket, I felt more alone than ever. After the funeral, I went back to Grandma's house, my house now, I guess. It felt too big, too empty. But I couldn't bear the thought of leaving. This was my home, filled with memories of the two people who'd raised me. Life went on. I threw myself into work, trying to fill the void Grandma left behind. Months passed, then a year, then two. Then, out of the blue, Mom called. "Michelle, darling," she chirped, sounding oddly cheerful. "I have wonderful news. Your sister's coming to America for college. Isn't that exciting?" I blinked, caught off guard. "Yeah, I guess." "That's nice. Here's the thing," Mom continued, her voice taking on that syrupy sweet tone she used when she wanted something. "She wants to go alone, but I'm worried about her. I was hoping she could stay with you." I felt my stomach drop. "Mom, I don't think." "Now, Michelle," she cut me off, her voice suddenly sharp. "Let's not forget who that house really belongs to. I'm the direct heir, you know. I've been very generous letting you live there. The least you could do is look after your sister." I felt like I'd been slapped. "But Grandma left the house to me," I said weakly. "She wrote a will." Mom laughed, a cold sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, sweetie. You don't understand how these things work. Trust me, I could claim that house if I wanted to. But I'm not going to, as long as you help out with your sister. Understand?" My mind was reeling. Could she really take the house? I didn't know enough about inheritance law to be sure. And the thought of losing my home, the last connection I had to Grandma and Grandpa. The day my sister arrived felt like the beginning of the end. I stood at the airport, holding a sign with her name, Chloe, feeling like an idiot. I'd only seen her in Mom's Facebook photos, always dolled up and posing like a model. I figured I'd spot her easily. Boy, was I wrong. I almost missed her when she strutted out of the arrival gate. This girl looked nothing like the sister I'd seen in pictures. She was, well, perfect. Too perfect. Like someone had ordered her from a celebrity lookalike catalog. Chloe? I called out, uncertain. She turned, her oversized sunglasses perched on a nose that was definitely not the one I'd seen in older photos. Oh my God, you must be Michelle, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. As she got closer, I could see the work she'd had done. Lips pumped up like life rafts, cheekbones that could cut glass, and a body that screamed at plastic surgeon's magnum opus. I felt like a potato next to her. As we waited for a porter, because apparently, that was a thing now, Chloe started rattling off demands like she was reading from a 5-year-old's Christmas list. So, like, in Europe, we have this amazing housekeeper who does everything. And a cook. You've arranged for that, right? She didn't wait for an answer. And I'll need my own car. Nothing cheap, obviously. Maybe a Mercedes. I stood there, mouth hanging open. Was this girl for real? Chloe, I said, trying to keep my voice level, I work a regular job. I can't afford. She cut me off with a wave of her manicured hand. Ugh. Whatever. Mom will take care of it. Let's just go already. We made it to the parking lot, and I led her to my car, a beat-up old Honda that had seen better days. Chloe took one look at it and lost her mind. What kind of squalor is this? Each word was like a slap. You expect me to ride in that thing? Before I could respond, she whipped out her phone. Mom? Yeah, it's me. You will not believe what Michelle is trying to make me ride in. It's practically a death trap. Huh? Yeah. Okay, love you too. She hung up and turned to me, a smug smile on her face. Mom's arranging for a car service. You can take that rust bucket home yourself. An hour later, Chloe's fancy town car pulled up in front of Grandma's house. As soon as we stepped inside, Chloe's dramatics reached new heights. Ugh. It smells like old people and mothballs in here, she shrieked. This is, like, a health hazard or something. We need to throw everything out and start over. I watched in horror as she stomped through the house, criticizing everything from the worn carpet to the family photos on the walls. When she reached my bedroom, she tossed her designer bag on the bed. This room's mine now. You can sleep. I don't know, wherever. The couch maybe? I stood there, speechless. This was my room. My sanctuary. The place where I'd cried myself to sleep after Grandma died, where I'd celebrated getting my first job, where I kept all my memories. But looking at Chloe's face, I knew arguing would be pointless. This girl was used to getting her way, and she'd make my life hell if I refused. A week after Hurricane Chloe made landfall in my life, I came home from work to find a shiny new Mercedes parked in my spot in the garage. My beat-up Honda had been unceremoniously shoved onto the street. What the hell? I muttered, stepping into the house. Chloe was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She didn't even look up. Oh, that's my new car. Mom got it for me. Your piece of junk was taking up valuable space. The next day, I thought I'd seen it all. I was wrong. I came home from work, exhausted and looking forward to a quiet evening. Instead, I walked into chaos. The house was filled with strange men in overalls, carrying out furniture and bringing in new pieces I'd never seen before. I found Chloe in the backyard, sipping a cocktail and supervising the mayhem like a pint-sized dictator. Oh, you're home, she said, not bothering to look at me. Don't worry, I've got everything under control. This dump needed a major overhaul. I told Mom it was unlivable, and she agreed. You should be thanking me. I watched in horror as workers carried out Grandma's old rocking chair, the bookshelf Grandpa had built by hand, the coffee table where I'd done my homework for years. Stop, I cried. You can't throw those out. But it was too late. I could only watch helplessly as my memories were tossed into a dumpster. That night, I called Mom, tears streaming down my face. "How could you let her do this?" I sobbed. "This is my home." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Mom spoke, her voice was cold. "Let's get one thing straight. That house belongs to me. I'm the rightful heir, and I'm letting you live there out of the goodness of my heart. If you can't appreciate that, maybe we need to reconsider this arrangement." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. You wouldn't. Just be grateful and keep quiet," Mom snapped. "And for God's sake, try to be nicer to your sister. She's doing you a favor." The line went dead. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling like my whole world was crumbling around me. The renovation lasted 2 hellish weeks. I came home every day to find more of my life erased, replaced by Chloe's idea of fashion. The warm, cozy home I'd grown up in was transformed into something out of a sterile design magazine. When it was finally over, I stood in the living room, feeling like a stranger in my own house. The familiar floral wallpaper was gone, replaced by stark white paint. Grandma's comfy old sofa had been swapped for a sleek leather monstrosity that looked about as comfortable as sitting on a rock. The family photos that used to line the walls were nowhere to be seen. As I retreated to my new room, the smallest bedroom, since Chloe had claimed the master for herself, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing more than just furniture. I was losing my connection to Grandma and Grandpa, to the life I'd built here. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, Chloe decided to turn our house into party central. It started small, just a few friends over on a Friday night. But soon, it was like living in a nightclub that never closed. Every weekend, sometimes even on weeknights, the house would fill up with Chloe's college buddies. They were all cut from the same cloth as her, rich, entitled, and looking down their noses at everything and everyone they deemed beneath them. Which, apparently, included me. One night, I overheard Chloe talking to one of her friends in the kitchen. I wasn't eavesdropping, I swear. I was just trying to grab a quick snack before retreating to my room to escape the chaos. "Who's that?" I heard a girl ask. "She looks kinda old to be here." Chloe's laugh was like nails on a chalkboard. "Oh, that's just Michelle. She's like this distant cousin or something. Mom lets her work here as a maid." I slammed the fridge shut, not caring if they heard me. Tears stung my eyes as I stormed back to my room. How dare she? This was my house, damn it. The next morning, after Chloe had finally rolled out of bed around noon, I confronted her. "No more parties," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This has to stop. I'm tired of coming home to a house full of strangers. I'm tired of the noise, the mess, everything." She rolled her eyes. "God, you're such a buzzkill. No wonder you don't have any friends." "This isn't about friends," I said. "The neighbors are complaining. There are families with kids next door, elderly people who can't sleep because of your noise." "Not my problem," Chloe shrugged. "They should move if they can't handle a little fun." I was about to really let her have it when the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Johnson from next door, looking tired and frustrated. "Michelle, dear," she said, "I hate to be a bother, but these parties, they're getting out of hand. Last night, someone threw up in my rose bushes." I felt my face burn with shame. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Johnson. It won't happen again. I promise." As soon as I closed the door, I turned to Chloe. "That's it. No more parties. I mean it." The next day, I got a call from Mom. I should have known Chloe would go running to her. "Michelle," Mom's voice was sharp. "What's this I hear about you trying to control your sister?" I took a deep breath. "Mom, it's not like that. The parties are out of control. The neighbors are complaining." "The neighbors?" Mom cut me off. "Who cares about the neighbors? Your sister is trying to make friends, to have a normal college experience. And you're trying to ruin it for her." "But Mom." "No buts," she snapped. "I won't have you interfering with Chloe's studies or her social life. Do you understand me? I felt something snap inside me. All the frustration, all the anger I'd been holding back, it all came rushing out. No, Mom, I don't understand, I said, my voice shaking. I can't live like this anymore. Take your precious Chloe back to Europe if you want, but I'm done being her maid and punching bag. I hung up before she could respond, my heart pounding. I'd done it. I'd finally stood up for myself. Just when I thought I'd finally taken a stand, life threw me another curveball. A week after my ultimatum to Mom, she showed up on my doorstep unannounced. She looked different, tired, worn down in a way I'd never seen before. Michelle, she said, her voice quivering. We need to talk. I let her in, my mind racing. Was she here to take the house? To drag Chloe back to Europe? Instead, she dropped a bombshell that left me reeling. I'm sick, Michelle, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. The doctors, they don't think I have much time left. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. What? Mom, what are you talking about? She went on to explain about some rare disease, using medical terms I didn't understand. But the gist was clear, Mom was dying. That's why I need you, sweetheart, she said, gripping my hand. Chloe, she's going to need someone when I'm gone. Someone to guide her, to be there for her. I need to know she'll have you. If you do, well, I'll make sure you're taken care of too. The house will be yours, free and clear. I blinked. But, the house is already mine. Grandma's will. Mom waved her hand dismissively. As Grandma's daughter, I'm the primary heir. I could claim at least half the house if I wanted to. My head was spinning. I need time to think, I stammered. Mom nodded, wiping away a tear. Of course, dear. I'll be here for a couple of days. We can talk more. Those 2 days were surreal. Mom fawned over the renovations Chloe had done, praising her exquisite taste at every turn. I was silent, afraid to say something rude about it. But the weirdest part was Chloe's behavior. It was like someone had flipped a switch. Gone was the party girl, replaced by a perfect angel who helped with dishes and spoke in a sickeningly sweet voice. She even offered to make dinner one night, though I noticed she ordered takeout and tried to pass it off as her own cooking. Mom ate it up, literally and figuratively. See how thoughtful your sister is, she cooed. You two are going to be so good for each other. I wanted to scream. Couldn't Mom see through this act? But every time I opened my mouth to protest, I remembered Mom's words about the house. About her illness. Could I really risk losing everything? On the last night of Mom's visit, she cornered me in the kitchen. Have you thought about what I said? She asked, her eyes pleading. I took a deep breath. Yes, I said finally. I'll try for you. Mom's face lit up. She pulled me into a hug, something she hadn't done in years. Thank you, sweetheart. You don't know what this means to me. I can go back to Europe knowing Chloe will be in good hands. The ink had barely dried on Mom's departure when Hurricane Chloe made her grand return. The following week, I got off work early and headed home, looking forward to a quiet evening. As soon as I turned onto our street, I knew something was wrong. The bass from some EDM track was so loud it made my car windows vibrate. I burst through the front door to find my worst nightmare come to life. The house was packed with people, drunk college kids, sketchy-looking older guys, even a couple making out on my grandmother's antique table. Chloe, I screamed over the music. Where are you? I pushed through the crowd, dodging spilled drinks and grabbing hands. When I reached Chloe's room, I found the door locked. Without thinking, I kicked it open. Chloe was there, tangled up with some guy I'd never seen before. They both looked up at me, startled. What the fuck? Chloe shrieked. Get out. Something in me snapped. All the frustration, all the anger I'd been bottling up for months came pouring out. No, you get out, I roared. All of you. This party is over. I stormed through the house, turning off the music and shouting at people to leave. When they didn't move fast enough, I grabbed the phone. "I'm calling the cops," I yelled. "Anyone still here in 5 minutes is getting arrested." That got them moving. The house emptied in record time, leaving behind a mess that made my stomach turn. Chloe emerged from her room, her face twisted with rage. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she spat. "You're just jealous because I know how to have fun." Well, guess what? I got kicked out of college, so now I can party whenever I want. And there's nothing you can do about it. Something inside me broke. Without thinking, I grabbed her arm and dragged her to the front door. "Oh, yeah, watch me." I shoved her outside, then ran back to her room. I grabbed armfuls of her designer clothes and threw them out onto the lawn. "You want to party? Go party somewhere else," I screamed, my voice hoarse. By now, neighbors had gathered, drawn by the commotion. I could hear Mrs. Johnson's voice, saying something about how it was about time I stood up for myself. But I didn't care about the audience. I was beyond caring about anything. I was still sitting on the floor, my back against the front door, when my phone rang. Mom's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered, bracing myself for the storm. "How dare you?" Mom's voice crackled through the speaker, shrill with anger. "Chloe just called me in tears. You ungrateful little reptile, after everything I've done for you." I cut her off with a laugh. A real, genuine laugh that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me. "Everything you've done for me?" I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "That's rich, Mom. Really rich." "Don't you take that tone with me, young lady," Mom snarled. "I'll remind you that I'm the rightful heir to that house. I can take it away from you with a snap of my fingers." I felt a smile spread across my face. "No, Mom, you can't. I talked to a lawyer yesterday. Grandma's will is ironclad. She left everything to me. Not you, not Chloe. Me. And there's nothing you can do about it." I heard Mom take a shaky breath. When she spoke again, her tone had changed completely. "Now, Michelle, let's not be hasty. I'm sure we can work something out. If you take Chloe back, I'll make it worth your while. I have property in Europe, a villa by the sea, a vineyard. It could all be yours." I thought about it for a moment. A villa by the sea did sound nice. But then I remembered the peace I'd felt in the moments after I'd kicked Chloe out. The relief of finally standing up for myself. No villa was worth giving that up. "Thanks, but no thanks," I said firmly. "Grandma left me her savings. It's more than enough for me to live comfortably. I don't need or want anything from you." I hung up and immediately blocked both her number and Chloe's. As I sat there in the quiet house, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, I was truly free. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I threw myself into cleaning up the mess Chloe had left behind, both literally and figuratively. I repainted walls, scrubbed floors, and slowly began to reclaim my space. One day, as I was chatting with Mrs. Johnson over the fence, she mentioned something that made my heart skip a beat. "You know," she said casually, "I saw some furniture at the flea market last week that looked just like your grandmother's old pieces. It was a shame to see it there, but I figured you must have sold it during the renovation." I thanked her and raced to my car. An hour later, I was wandering through the flea market, my heart pounding. And there they were, the grandma's old rocking chair, the bookshelf Grandpa had built, even the coffee table where I'd done my homework for years. I bought them all back for a fraction of what they were worth to me. The vendor looked at me strangely as I hugged the rocking chair, tears in my eyes, but I didn't care. Over the next few days, I transformed one of the spare bedrooms into a replica of Grandma's old living room. As I arranged the familiar furniture, hung the old family photos back on the walls, I felt like I was rebuilding more than just a room. I was rebuilding my connection to my past, to the people who had loved me unconditionally. Months have passed since then. The house is quiet now, peaceful. Sometimes, when I sit in Grandma's rocking chair, reading a book or just enjoying the silence, I think about everything that's happened. About Mom and Chloe and the life I thought I wanted. I won't pretend it doesn't hurt sometimes, knowing I've cut ties with the only family I had left. But then I look around at the home I've reclaimed, at the life I've built for myself, and I know I made the right choice.
My name's Deborah, and let me paint you a picture of my family. There's my mom, Karen, yeah, fitting name, I know. She's all about her career and freedom. Then there's my dad, Tom, who's about as useful as a screen door on a submarine when it comes to parenting. My sister, Jessica, is 14 years older than me and couldn't care less about my existence. I came into this world as an unwelcome surprise. Mom was 42 when she found out she was pregnant with me. She thought it was menopause at first. Guess the universe has a twisted sense of humor. When she finally dragged herself to the doctor, it was too late to take care of it, if you catch my drift. From what I pieced together over the years, it went something like this. Tom, what the hell are we going to do? Mom probably screeched, pacing around their bedroom. Dad, being the spineless wonder he is, probably just shrugged. I don't know, Karen. Maybe we should talk to my dad? And that's how Grandpa Joe got roped into this mess. He's loaded and lives in Canada, but he flew down to play peacemaker. Karen, Tom, listen, he must have said, all calm and collected. I know this isn't what you planned, but it's happening. I'll help you out financially. Just give this child a chance. Mom, being the career-obsessed woman she is, probably huffed and puffed before finally agreeing. Fine, but I'm not letting this kid derail my life. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how I, Deborah, came to be. Born premature, with a whole host of health problems, and into a family that saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. My early days were spent more in the hospital than at home. Mom couldn't be bothered to show up most of the time. It was Dad and Aunt Sarah who took turns keeping watch over my incubator. Aunt Sarah, now there's a saint if I ever met one. No kids or husband of her own, she latched onto me like a lifeline. While my own mother was probably off closing deals and climbing the corporate ladder, Aunt Sarah was there, holding my tiny hand through the incubator's holes, whispering words of encouragement. When I finally got to go home, Grandpa Joe swooped in again. Our house wasn't big enough for 2 kids, apparently. So, he bought us a new one. Growing up in that house was like living in a museum. Look, but don't touch. Don't make noise. Don't exist too loudly. I learned pretty damn quick that I wasn't part of the exhibit, just some unwanted artifact they couldn't get rid of. Mom and Dad were always working. When they weren't, they acted like I was some kind of leech, sucking the life out of them. We had a parade of nannies coming through the house. Some were nice, some weren't, but none of them stuck around long enough to matter. Jessica, my so-called sister, might as well have been a stranger living in the same house. 14 years is a hell of an age gap, and she made it clear she had no interest in playing big sister. I remember one time, I must have been about 6, I tried to hang out in her room while she was getting ready for college. Jessica, can I watch you do your makeup? I asked, peering around her doorframe. She barely glanced at me. No, Deborah. I'm busy. Go play with your toys or something. But I don't want to play alone, I whined. Can't we do something together? She slammed her mascara down on the dresser and whirled to face me. Look, we're not friends, okay? I'm not here to entertain you. Go bother Mom or Dad. That was pretty much the extent of our sisterly bonding. Mom was even worse. Every day when she got home from work, it was the same routine. She'd walk in, kick off her heels, and make a beeline for the liquor cabinet. Mom, I'd call out, excited to see her. Can we play a game? Or read a story? She'd pour herself a large glass of wine and sigh heavily. For God's sake, Deborah. Can't you see I need some peace and quiet? Go to your room and play by yourself. You're old enough to entertain yourself. And Dad? He'd promised Mom he'd take care of me if she had me. What a joke that turned out to be. He was always too busy or too tired to spend time with me. His favorite phrase became, "Not now, Deborah." I remember overhearing them argue about it once. I was supposed to be in bed, but I'd snuck out to get a glass of water. "Tom, you promised you'd help with her," Mom hissed. "I can't do this all on my own." "What do you want from me, Karen?" Dad shot back. "I work all day too. I'm exhausted when I get home." "She's always so needy." I didn't stick around to hear the rest. I'd heard enough to know where I stood in their eyes, a burden, an obligation, a mistake they were stuck with. After a while, I stopped trying. What was the point? I learned to entertain myself, to be quiet, to stay out of their way. I became a ghost in my own home, drifting from room to room, trying not to disturb the real family. The only bright spot in my life was Aunt Sarah. She lived nearby, and I started spending more and more time at her place. Weekends, holidays, any chance I got, really. With Aunt Sarah, I felt seen, heard, loved even. We'd spend hours doing puzzles, baking cookies, or just talking. She'd ask me about school, my friends, my hopes and dreams. Things my own parents never bothered with. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. I was 14, minding my own business, trying to survive another day in the emotional wasteland I called home, when my parents dropped a bombshell on me. "Deborah," Mom said, her voice unusually chipper. "We have wonderful news. Your sister Jessica is getting married, and she's pregnant." Dad chimed in, grinning like an idiot. "We're going to be grandparents." I forced a smile, wondering why the hell they were telling me this like I should be jumping for joy. "That's great," I managed to say. "We're going to be very busy preparing for the wedding," Mom continued, not even noticing my lack of enthusiasm. "So, we want you to stay with your Aunt Sarah for a while." I blinked, processing their words. They wanted to ship me off? Because of a wedding? Part of me wanted to be hurt, but honestly, it was the best news I'd heard in years. "Sure," I said, trying not to sound too eager. "I'd love to stay with Aunt Sarah." They looked relieved, probably expecting me to put up a fight. Shows how little they knew me. I packed my bags faster than you could say unwanted child and practically skipped to Aunt Sarah's house. Months flew by. The wedding preparations were in full swing, but I couldn't care less. I was too busy enjoying my new life. Aunt Sarah and I would cook together, watch movies, go for walks in the park. She'd help me with my homework, listen to me ramble about my day at school, and actually seemed interested in what I had to say. Before I knew it, a week before Jessica's wedding rolled around. It was also my 15th birthday. That morning, I woke up to the smell of pancakes and the sound of Aunt Sarah singing off-key in the kitchen. I grinned, padding downstairs in my pajamas. "Happy birthday, my dear," Aunt Sarah exclaimed, pulling me into a bone-crushing hug. "I've got a surprise for you." She handed me a beautifully wrapped box. "It's from your grandfather, he sent it yesterday." I tore into the wrapping paper, my eyes widening as I revealed a brand new smartphone, the latest model, no less. I dialed Grandpa Joe's number, my heart racing with excitement. "Hello, birthday girl," his warm voice filled the line. "Do you like your present?" "Like it? Grandpa, I love it." "Thank you so much." We chatted for a bit, and then he asked the question I'd been dreading. "So, how did your parents congratulate you?" I hesitated, not wanting to admit the truth. "Oh, I haven't seen them yet. I was planning to go home soon, actually. I'm sure they'll say something then." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, "I see. Well, why don't you do a live broadcast when you go? I'd love to share in the joy." With a mixture of hope and dread churning in my stomach, I made my way back to my parents' house. The walk felt both too long and too short. As I turned onto our street, I took a deep breath and started the live broadcast on my new phone. "Hey, Grandpa," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "I'm on my way to see Mom and Dad now." Thanks again for the awesome phone. I chatted away as I walked, filling the silence with babble about my morning with Aunt Sarah and how excited I was about my birthday. But as I approached our house, a sense of unease crept over me. Well, here we are, I announced to the camera, climbing the front steps. I hesitated for a moment before pushing open the door. Mom? Dad? I'm home. Silence greeted me. The house felt eerily quiet, almost abandoned. I frowned, panning the camera around the empty living room. Guess they're not down here, I muttered, more to myself than to Grandpa. I'll check upstairs. I climbed the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the quiet house. As I reached the top, I noticed something odd. The door to my room was closed, which was unusual. I always left it open when I wasn't home. That's weird, I said, reaching for the doorknob. My door's never closed. I pushed it open and froze. The room that greeted me was not my room. At least, not anymore. The walls, once a soft lavender, were now a pale blue. My posters were gone, replaced by cutesy animal prints. My bed had vanished, and in its place stood a white crib. What the hell? I gasped, stumbling backward. The phone nearly slipped from my grasp as I spun around, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This can't be right. This is my room. Just then, I heard a door open behind me. I whirled around to see my parents emerging from their bedroom, looking startled to see me. Deborah? Mom said, her eyes darting between me and the phone in my hand. What are you doing here? I barely registered her words, still reeling from the shock of my transformed room. What happened to my room? I demanded. Why is it blue? Where's all my stuff? Dad cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. Well, you see, Deborah, we've decided to give this room to your sister's baby. Our first grandson. Mom nodded, a smile plastering itself across her face. Yes, isn't it wonderful? Jessica's having a boy, the son your father's always dreamed of having. He'll be living here with us after the wedding. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. But where am I supposed to sleep? Where's my stuff? Oh, we packed up your things, Dad said, waving his hand dismissively. They're in boxes downstairs. You should take them with you when you leave. We don't want them cluttering up the place. I stared at them, unable to comprehend what I was hearing. Leave? What do you mean, leave? This is my home. Mom's smile faltered for a moment before she forced it back into place. Deborah, dear, you have to understand. With Jessica and her husband moving in, and the baby on the way, well, there's just no room for you here anymore. I stood there, frozen in disbelief, my mind reeling from what I'd just heard. Suddenly, a surge of anger welled up inside me, pushing through the shock. No, I said, my voice shaking. No, I won't leave. This is my home too. You can't just throw me out like I'm nothing. Mom's fake smile vanished, replaced by a look of irritation. For heaven's sake, Deborah. Don't be difficult. Difficult? I spat back. It's my birthday, and you're kicking me out. You didn't even remember, did you? Dad rolled his eyes. Your birthday? Is that what this tantrum is about? We don't have time for this nonsense. Their callousness hit me like a physical blow. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I blinked them back furiously. How can you be so cruel? I'm your daughter. A daughter we never wanted. Mom snapped, her composure finally cracking. Do you have any idea how much you've cost us? How much attention you've demanded? We're exhausted, Deborah. Dad nodded, his face twisted with annoyance. We didn't want a second child. You were a mistake, an accident. And now, we finally have a chance at the family we always wanted. Their words cut deep, each one a knife to my heart. I watched in stunned silence as they grabbed the bags they'd packed with my belongings and started shoving them out the front door. There, Mom said, dusting off her hands. Now take your things and go to your precious Aunt Sarah. She loves you so much, let her deal with you. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare. "What are you waiting for?" Dad barked. "Get out. We have a wedding to prepare for, and we don't need you here complicating things." That's when the dam broke. Tears streamed down my face as the full weight of their rejection crashed over me. "How could you do this to me?" I sobbed. "I'm your child." "Stop it," Mom hissed, glancing nervously at the windows. "You're embarrassing us. The neighbors will hear." "Good," I shouted through my tears. "Let them hear. Let everyone know what kind of people you really are." Dad grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "That's enough," he growled, practically dragging me to the door. "Get out, now. And don't come back." With one final shove, I found myself on the front porch, my bags scattered around me. The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my bones. I don't know how long I sat there, sobbing on the steps. Eventually, I gathered my things and started the long, miserable walk back to Aunt Sarah's. The bags felt impossibly heavy, weighed down by more than just my possessions. As I trudged along, sniffling and wiping my eyes, a familiar voice suddenly cut through my misery. "Deborah, can you hear me?" I jumped, looking around wildly before realizing the voice was coming from my phone. With a jolt of horror, I remembered the live broadcast. Grandpa had seen everything. "Grandpa?" I stammered, lifting the phone with trembling hands. "Oh, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Look, we'll sort this out, I promise. For now, go to Sarah's. We'll see each other at the wedding in a few days, okay? Try to enjoy your birthday." Somehow, his words managed to calm me down a little. By the time I reached Aunt Sarah's, my tears had mostly subsided. She took one look at me, standing there with my bags and puffy eyes, and pulled me into a fierce hug. Aunt Sarah, bless her heart, insisted we celebrate my birthday properly. She let me invite a few friends over, baked a cake, and did her best to make the day special. The day of Jessica's wedding arrived. I hadn't been invited, of course, but Aunt Sarah insisted we go anyway. So there I was, decked out in my best dress, feeling like an imposter as we walked into the reception hall. I spotted Grandpa Joe almost immediately. He was sitting at a table near the front, his back ramrod straight, radiating an energy that made me nervous. Before we even had time to say hello, the newlyweds made their grand entrance. Jessica looked radiant in her white gown, beaming as she clung to her new husband's arm. Mom and Dad followed, pride evident in their faces, and I felt a pang in my chest. The reception progressed with toasts, dinner, and the usual festivities. As the congratulatory speeches began during the festive dinner, Grandpa Joe suddenly stood up. "I have something to say," he announced, his voice ringing out across the hall. Every head turned. Jessica and her groom looked confused. Mom and Dad went pale. Grandpa Joe marched to the front of the room, commandeering the microphone from the stunned best man. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I apologize for interrupting this joyous occasion, but there's a grave injustice that needs to be addressed." He then launched into a detailed account of how my parents had treated me. He spared no detail, from their resentment of my birth to the cruel way they'd kicked me out on my birthday. With each word, the guests' expressions changed from confusion to shock to outrage. Mom tried to interrupt, her face beat red. Jessica was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. Her new husband looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. The guests were whispering among themselves, shooting scandalized looks at my parents. Grandpa turned to face my parents directly, his voice cold as ice. "So let me make this clear. I'm changing my will. Every cent I have will go to Sarah and Deborah. Tom, Karen, Jessica, you're cut off. Completely." The reception hall erupted into chaos. Mom let out a strangled cry, Dad's face turned an alarming shade of purple. Jessica wailed something about her ruined wedding. But Grandpa wasn't done. He walked over to where Aunt Sarah and I sat, shell-shocked by the spectacle. "Come on, girls," he said gently. "We're leaving. We don't need to stay where we're not wanted." In a daze, I stood up and followed him. As we walked towards the exit, I could feel every eye on me. Some looked sympathetic, others judgmental. I kept my gaze fixed on Grandpa's back, willing myself not to cry. The morning after the wedding disaster, I woke up to the sound of insistent knocking on Aunt Sarah's front door. Bleary-eyed and still processing the events of the previous day, I stumbled downstairs to find Mom and Dad on the porch, looking a strange mix of desperate and contrite. "Deborah, sweetie," Mom cooed, her voice sickeningly sweet. "We need to talk. We want you to come home, honey. We're so sorry about everything. We love you, we really do." I felt a surge of anger rising in my chest. "Love me? You kicked me out. You said I was a mistake." They launched into a litany of apologies and explanations, each one more pathetic than the last. But as I stood there, listening to their desperate pleas, a realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't about me at all. "This is about the inheritance, isn't it?" I said, cutting off Dad mid-sentence. Their faces fell, confirming my suspicions. They didn't want me back, they wanted Grandpa's money. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "I don't want to see either of you ever again." I slammed the door in their faces, leaning against it as I tried to calm my racing heart. But my parents weren't done. Over the next few days, they showed up repeatedly, each time more insistent than the last. They called, they sent emails, they even tried to rope in other family members to convince me. It all came to a head about a week after the wedding. I was home alone when I heard a commotion outside. To my horror, I saw Mom and Dad trying to force their way past Aunt Sarah, who had just returned from the grocery store. "She's our daughter," Dad was yelling. "You can't keep her from us." Something in me snapped. I'd had enough of their manipulation, their lies, their sudden concern for my well-being now that money was on the line. "Aunt Sarah," I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. "I want you to be my legal guardian." The words hung in the air for a moment. Then Aunt Sarah's face broke into a wide smile. "Oh, sweetie, I'd be honored." With Aunt Sarah's help, we contacted a lawyer the very next day. The process wasn't easy, there were forms to fill out, interviews to conduct, and a court hearing to attend. But through it all, I held on to one piece of evidence that I knew would make all the difference: the video from my ill-fated birthday visit home. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I felt sick to my stomach. My parents were there, of course, playing the role of concerned, loving parents to the hilt. But when the judge asked for evidence, and we played that video, the one where they kicked me out, where they told me I was unwanted, the atmosphere in the courtroom changed. I'll never forget the look on the judge's face as she watched my parents callously toss me aside. When the video ended, she turned to them, her expression hard. "In all my years on the bench," she said, "I've rarely seen such a clear case of parental neglect and emotional abuse." The ruling came swiftly after that. Aunt Sarah was granted full legal guardianship, and my parents' rights were terminated. As the gavel came down, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I was free of their toxic influence. Life has a funny way of coming full circle. Just when I thought the drama was finally over, Grandpa Joe called us over to his lawyer's office. As we sat in the plush leather chairs, surrounded by mahogany bookshelves and the smell of old paper, I couldn't help but feel nervous. "Deborah, Sarah," Grandpa began, his voice solemn but his eyes twinkling, "I want you both to know that I've made some changes to my will." He nodded to his lawyer, who pulled out a thick document. "As I promised at the wedding," Grandpa continued, "I've decided to leave my entire estate to you too. Tom and Karen are officially disinherited." I sat there, stunned. I knew Grandpa had threatened this at the wedding, but I never really believed he'd go through with it. As we left the lawyer's office, my head spinning with the implications of what had just happened, my phone rang. It was Jessica. "How could you do this to me?" she screeched as soon as I answered. "You've ruined everything." I pulled the phone away from my ear, wincing at her volume. "What are you talking about?" Don't play dumb, she snapped. You turned Grandpa against us. Now he's leaving everything to you and Aunt Sarah. It's not fair. I want my share too. I felt a flash of anger. After everything that had happened, after the way they'd all treated me, she had the nerve to demand money? Look, Jessica, I said, trying to keep my voice level, I didn't ask for any of this. It was Grandpa's decision, not mine. But you must have manipulated him somehow, she insisted. You've always been jealous of me. This is your revenge, isn't it? I took a deep breath, counting to 10 in my head before responding. Jessica, I'm sorry you feel that way. But I had nothing to do with Grandpa's decision. If you want to change his mind, you'll have to talk to him yourself. Maybe I will, she huffed. And don't think this is over, Deborah. You can't just waltz in and steal what's rightfully ours. As she hung up, I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but mostly just exhaustion. And then I decided to focus on my future. I threw myself into my studies, determined to ace my exams and get into a good college. Aunt Sarah helped me research schools, majors, and scholarship opportunities. Sure, my family situation was far from perfect. There would probably be more drama with Jessica, my parents, and the inheritance down the line. But for now, I had a loving home with Aunt Sarah and Grandpa Joe, a bright future ahead of me, and the strength to face whatever challenges came my way.